Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. A family reunion. Looks like that's our cue, Shinji muttered as the third fight finally came to an end. Ichigo nodded as the two said their goodbyes to the others and started their descent down to the stadium's entrance. The last battle had been interesting to watch. Raventail had fought very well against the Garu Knights, Ichigo noticed. Or rather, Kaname had. Alexei had merely stood back and watched, probably hiding a bored expression under that golden helmet he wore. The Garu Knights had put up a good fight, but Kama and Yuasuk had been unprepared for Kaname's skill and speed. It even felt like he was playing with them for a lot of the match before he finally decided to end it. Leaving the finally step downwards, Ichigo frowned as he realized who he would end up facing now. It'd be a relief if he wasn't fighting them, but fate wasn't that kind. Their names had been announced with their own. There was no one else, and that was proven correct when he entered the arena, shielding his eyes for a second from the harsh glare of the sun. His eyes came to focus on his sisters standing not too far away. Karen still had that scowl on whenever she looked at him. Yuzu, well, she was at least smiling at him a bit. That was something, right? As for his dad. There he is. My wonderful son. Despite how they had last left off, his dad seemed to be in high spirits. Or maybe it was because he had actually gone by Kurosaki again. Maybe that had caused his dad to go back to being his annoying self that he remembered from so long ago. To be honest, he didn't find it nearly as annoying as it should have been. That was the only thing that stopped him throwing his sword at him as his father started rambling on further. Hello, big brother, Yuzu muttered awkwardly, their dad's comments probably not helping the situation much now that he thought about it. I wish we didn't have to fight, she added in a whisper. Karen still heard it though. He's got what's coming to him. She slammed her fists together as she glared at Ichigo angrily. I'll make him pay for abandoning us. Yuzu, you can stay back. Yuzu stared at her sister in shock and disbelief. Karen, you can't be serious. Pulling her sister to one side, she lowered her voice so no one else could hear. Did you forget what Dad used to tell us about Ichigo? All those stories are exaggerated, Yuzu, Karen said in annoyance. Don't tell me you still believe some of them. He probably made half of them up on the spot because you asked so much. And it was definitely obvious when Gotchin decided to try and make us believe he saved an entire country and made his own personal harem. Yuzu shook her head. Okay, I'll admit those last ones are probably fakes. But still I'll be fine, Yuzu. And what about his friend Shinji? You don't have to worry, said Shinji cheerfully, waving at them in the process. He'd recognized instantly that they had tried to talk about him the moment their eyes had glanced slightly towards him. I'm staying out of this little affair. Patting Ichigo on the back, Shinji began walking to one of the far walls of the stadium. Don't mind me. I'll just be enjoying the show over there. Karen scowled at him, wanting to wipe that annoying smirk of his face. Yuzu grabbed her before she could do anything though, reminding her quickly of what happened last time she fought him. Karen paused at that before scowling further. She did at least stop trying to leap at the man though, restraining herself and instead focusing on the other outlet for her anger. Her brother. Well then bro, she said mockingly, raising a fist at him. Shall we begin? Ichigo shrugged, shoving his hands in his pockets. If that is what you want. If we could, I'd rather. Ichigo moved to one side, dodging the suddenly strike Karen launched as she flashed forward with Shunpo. Avoid fighting if Karen spun around, one leg coming up and attempting to slam into his chest. At the last second he jumped off the ground lightly, letting her momentum carry her attack past before he landed safely on the ground. We can. You are one of my precious little sisters after all. Is that so, huh? Karen didn't let her frustrations get the better of her yet. Right now she wanted to keep that anger bubbling as a sharp edge. If she let it spill out just yet, then she'd waste the opportunities to exploit any weaknesses he showed. It would be easier to control it though if he wasn't being so goddamn annoying while dodging. Speeding up, Karen darted from side to side around Ichigo, using her speed to try and disorient him before reappearing above him and bringing her foot down. Ichigo's eyes tracked her lazily with each movement she made, however, his body already sidestepping to avoid her blow as her foot slammed down. She was already moving, however, the moment her foot missed her target by an inch, using Shunpo to dart away and recover before charging back in even faster. "Not bad," muttered Ichigo as he weaved between the barrages of fast punches she unloaded on him. "Who taught you? You're fast. Faster than I think suits your overall style. You're Yuki Shihaoran, the goddess of flash." Ichigo's eyes widened a fraction from their lazy expression, instantly glancing towards the stands where he could sense a familiar set of magical powers. He didn't need to worry about pinpointing their position, and that'd be hard enough to do anyway. Kisuke's green and white bucket hat was enough of a giveaway. "Don't look away." Karen's suddenly kick came up so suddenly that she was sure she had got him. At the last second, however, Ichigo moved faster than before, using a brief burst of Shunpo to get behind her. She moved away in a rush to avoid a counter-attack onto Topaz after getting a few feet away. He hadn't even moved threateningly. In fact, all he had done was glance towards her over his shoulder. His hands were still resting in his pockets, for crying out loud. "Goddess of Flash, huh?" Ichigo glanced back to Yuki before back towards Karen. "She must have taught you a lot then. She's fast from what I heard. I never got to see her in action though, but I know a bit from Kisuke, and then more useful stuff from old council reports." "That's right," said Karen, letting a hint of arrogance enter her voice. "You really want to keep taking it easy against a disciple of the goddess of Flash herself? Her pupils don't exactly settle for slow paces." Ichigo waved her arrogance off, acting as if it had merely been a concern. "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine. Besides, I'm sure our training would have equaled up to some degree anyway. Try and learn Kata when it's tough for you and when your master is basically a master at the art." Karen froze before a smirk grew across her face. Ichigo frowned at it, puzzled by what he had done to cause such a reaction. "Don't tell me I just gave you an idea? I'm still hoping here that you just give up." "Give up? Against you? Never." Karen shot forward, launching a telegraphed strike at her opponent. Ichigo easily dodged before Karen brought up her other hand, red energy already charged in her palm. "Hada number 31, Shakaha." Just as the energy exploded out of her palm, Ichigo brought out a hand and flickered a finger towards it, a sudden bullet of red energy flying forward into the energy and making it detonate prematurely. Ichigo was already moving as the remaining energy tried to reach him, backing away as he put his hand back in his pocket only to be forced upwards as he noticed a large strike of orange energy forming a web dome around him. "Got you," muttered Karen as it enclosed him within. "Hada number 12, Fuchsia. Now then, let's make this next spell strong enough." Hada number 54, Hyene. Swiping sideways at the cage, an oblong blast of purple energy flung towards it before spreading all over the net. It took but a moment and right afterwards the entire cage exploded into flames. "Isn't that a bit overkill, Karen?" called Yuzu, a hint of worry in her voice. Karen simply shook her head though, staring into the inferno. "I doubt that's enough to stop him. It's probably enough to make him get serious though." "Really?" asked Ichigo, his voice causing Karen to freeze. He was right behind her, his head close to the ribbon she used to tie up her head. "Hey, you did keep it. I thought it looked familiar, but it really is the same one. I'm surprised. Maybe you wouldn't have been if you had actually been there." Karen swung round with a sharp fist, Ichigo leaning back and letting it sail past. She got a good look at him quickly and the sight made her groan internally. He didn't even have a scratch on him. Not even a single singe was present on him. Well, it worried her a bit. "I have to say though, you used a level 50 spell with such ease. You must be talented. Or maybe it's because the spell is fire-based." A twitch developed in her eye. "Definitely fire-based. Taoshiro said you had a talent for it. I have to say though that just because I like Taoshiro, it doesn't mean I accept him as your boyfriend, Karen." There was silence for a moment, Yuzu's eyes widening as Karen finally broke the silence with an almost sadistic mid-laugh. "Me? Him? Dating?" She clenched her fists before fire burst out all around her. "Why the hell does everyone keep saying that?" Bambietta whistled from her seat as she watched the flames exploding around Karen. "Oh, I like her. She's got a temper to match yours, stated Yuryu in annoyance. At least she's not as bad though. Hey, what's wrong with me? You want to fight? No thanks. You reduce the area to ground zero when you get embarrassed. I'm not interested in fighting such a pointless battle. Kisuk looked on in interest as he recognized the energy being emitted. Why, I'm surprised. You taught her that? Got to pass it on to someone. Didn't expect her to master it so quickly though. Karen breathed in as the flames started to become controlled around her. The back of her Shiakushou had been blown away by the sudden release of energy, revealing a second top underneath with no back or sleeves to it. The flames drew in closer to her until they were almost like a second skin, intensifying the most around her arms and back. Never seen that before, said Ichigo, impressed. Karen fought the urge to smirk at that. That lazy look in his eyes was vanishing slowly. If he didn't take her seriously now, then she'd just rush him with the additional boost of power she had just gained. What is that? Shunkao, stated Karen. Like it? It's Hakuta and Kidu as one. Explains the flames, muttered Ichigo, his eyes watching the flames around her. They are definitely Kidu-based, and definitely stronger than the other ones you've tried to use. You going to take me seriously yet? Do I really have to? I really don't want to fight you. We could just settle with a draw after all. Like I'd accept that. Blasting forward with both Shunpo and the flames, Karen got her fist an inch away from Ichigo's face when he vanished, dodging to one side with a fast Shunpo. She didn't let it get to her, even if it was much faster than she expected from him. Instead she pivoted and shot forward again, bringing both arms round and expelling the Kidu right at him in a wave of flames. Just as she expected, he jumped over them, and as he did she was right there with a fist cocked back. She used the flames to accelerate it right at him and prepared the flames to be expelled forward. She didn't expect him to finally remove a hand from his pockets again and swat her arm away at the last moment, the flames leaving a few singes across his hair with how close they got. It might have been a trick of her eyes, but she could swear she couldn't see the singes a second later. Come on Karen, Ichigo said, as if lecturing her. Can't we just dash? Don't even say it. She screamed at him, releasing a massive burst of flames forward. She heard him tut from her right side, knowing immediately her attack hadn't connected. Sneakily grabbing her sword, she swung, almost catching him off guard with the sudden switch of attack. The flames on her arms quickly began encroaching down across the hilt towards the blade's edge, coating the whole thing in flames. She can use Shunkao on her Zanpakuto? Asked Kisuk, staring at Yuryu. Yuryu simply smirked proudly as she watched her student raise her Zanpakuto upwards. She has an affinity for flames and her Zanpakuto is one of heat and flames. Combining the two sources is easy in such cases. Gripping the hilt tightly, Karen swung down as a large crescent slash of flames showed towards Ichigo. Getchuga Tenshou. You know I feel like I'm getting ripped off here, muttered Ichigo in response before vanishing quickly in a burst of something Karen recognized. That was odd though. She had to have gotten it wrong. That couldn't have been Hiren Kyoka, right? Incredible, said Chapati in shock as he watched the flames shatter against the barrier and yet still cause a large slash along the ground in the process. He turned towards Ishine and Lahar curiously as he spoke again. Ishine, you were the first Shinigami to use the Getchuga Tenshou. Can you tell any of us anything about it? Most techniques like that are thought to be unique to a single person. Ishine chuckled. What can I say? I guess they just inherited it since it wasn't a big factor in my Zanpakuto's use compared to other abilities. It's definitely a favorite of mine though. You'll find that it's probably Karen and Ichigo's, I bet too. Even Yuzu has her own Quincy version of it, though it's harder for her than it is for us since she doesn't have a Zanpakuto to assist with it. It must be strong if it is still a favorite of yours even now, commented Lahar in interest. Have you not already outgrown it? Ishine shrugged. The thing about the Getchuga Tenshou is that it is kind of selfish in some ways. It's like a bottomless pit. It will take all the energy you want it and use it as fuel. Hell, the big factor I've found in how much I can pack into it is not in power but in my level of control once it gets too big. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. You can only hold so much before it slips through your fingers or spills over the edge of your palms. Ichigo eyed the damage of the Getsuga Tenshou as he walked towards where Karen was waiting. Damn. And here I really did want to get out of this without fighting. I won't let you. Burn everything till it melts, Amol. Even the Shunkao flames intensified as the energy was released around her, creating larger flames than ever before as Amol took shape in her hands. Ichigo sighed before he reached for the sword on his back, keeping his other hand in his pocket. He pulled it out of the sheath in one swift motion and swiped it down to one side, and Karen could swear for a second that she heard the wind get cut from just that single action. Hey Yuzo, Ichigo shouted, calling out to the Quincy watching not too far away. You going to help your sister? It's not going to be good if you don't. Karen said she wanted to fight alone. That's not a good idea. I know, stated Yuzo, keeping Ichigo distracted for a moment as Karen used Shunpo to get behind Ichigo. But I have to respect her wishes a bit. I get what you mean. Ichigo's blade came up quickly above his head and blocked Karen's overhead strike. He glanced over his shoulder at her, eyeing the massive blade she wielded. I have to say, Amol is very impressive. I can actually feel it trying to cut through my own Zanpakuto. Unfortunately my Shikai is not so easily broken. Zanjutsu is not a blade that likes allowing others to damage it. Karen scowled, trying to put more strength into her blow as the flames intensifying around her Zanpakuto. Ichigo quickly backed off and she pressed her advantage only for him to disappearing with a booming sound, reappearing again behind her. Spinning around, she swiped with Amol only for it to be blocked one-handed as Ichigo held Zanjutsu parallel to her own blade. Shunpo brought her round to the other side but he had already moved his blade to that side in the time it took her to swing. He was too goddamn fast. Still, she had been prepared for her attack to not connect. As her blade connected, chains burst out from her gauntlets, snapping around Ichigo and pulling his arms tightly to his side. She saw Ichigo's expression morph for a moment. It looked like shock but for a second she thought she had seen almost pride in there too. And then he was free, the chains snapping around him as he blew them away with a burst of raw magical power. Lifting the sword back up, he suddenly vanished, reappearing in front of her with his Zanpakuto raised. She barely got Amol up in time to block and, to her shock, she found that his Zanpakuto had actually dug a bit into her own. How? Her Zanpakuto was one that melted and cut through other Zanpakuto. Its strength was in its great heat. Some Zanpakuto she had problems cutting because of their natures, like Taoshiro and his ice-type Zanpakuto, but Ichigo didn't have anything like that according to what she had been told and shown. And yet he was overwhelming her Zanpakuto's cutting power with raw energy, and even using it to push back against her own. How much magical power did he even have? This was nothing like what he had been giving off the past few days. Had he been suppressing it all to keep everyone in the dark? To surprise them? Pushing back with as much strength as she could muster, she forced Ichigo's blade upwards, catching him off guard for a brief moment. She wouldn't get her sword back in time, he was too quick for that, so instead she slammed a fist into his stomach, releasing a heavy burst of Kita from her Shunkao. Kongabaku. A large storm of flames exploded outwards as it connected against Ichigo, consuming him in an inferno she knew he wouldn't have escaped from in time. The flames were suddenly sent flying to one side by a large gust of wind, the source coming from Ichigo's Zanpakuto as he swiped to one side. In front of her eyes she saw the burns he had received regenerating, the flesh returning to its usual color as all traces of injury vanished. She almost dropped her sword from the sight, a shiver going down her spine from the fear she was suddenly feeling. What? How? Ah, I assume you've never seen any forms of regeneration before beside Kellia's, muttered Ichigo as he scratched his head. This is a power of mine. It's not really as fancy as hers but it's certainly faster. It was instant regeneration but I'm not sure it can really go by that name anymore to describe it. Instead I call it instant restoration. Yuruaki frowned as she watched the sight. What's he talking about, Kisuk? She froze as she saw an almost mad grin on Kisuk's face, his hands pressed together in front of him in an effort to contain his excitement. Kisuk. I've been waiting years to see this, he responded, chuckling madly. Over 10 years of research, and then 20 years of waiting for Ichigo to fully develop his power, but it is finally here. Exactly what I was waiting for. What are you talking about, Kisuk? Instant restoration is a term I've never heard of. Because he's got the right to name it. He's the one who was the first able to use it. Tell me, what do you think Ichigo actually is? He's a Shinigami/Hollow hybrid, said Yoruaki as if stated a fact. What? Are you going to say he combined a Hollow's instant regeneration with a Shinigami's internal healing capabilities? No. You're missing a step after all. Taking advantage of Karen's shock, Ichigo lunged forward. She snapped out of her stupor just in time to bring up her blade only for the end of it to go flying off, Ichigo's own blade cutting clean through it. She backed away before he could press his advantage, but it proved unnecessary. Yuzo made sure of that when she appeared at Ichigo's exposed side, a bow of energy knocked in her hands. Licked Regan. A massive amount of arrows fired from her bow, faster than she could even try and draw it. Ichigo darted back as he dodged some of the arrows, but their mass numbers made it impossible to dodge them all. He quickly stabbed his large sword into the ground before he leaped over it, using it as a shield from the onslaught. As Yuzo kept up her attack, Karen took advantage of the time she had been given. Her Zanpakuto wasn't the strongest out there in terms of internal strength. Her father had once explained a theory he had about her blade that he believed was true. Her Zanpakuto produced enough heat to be able to melt its way through even another Zanpakuto. That weakness, however, carried over to her. If someone could overcome her Zanpakuto's power, could resist the heat, then it was also possible that it could be turned against her and would use it to push their own Zanpakuto through her own. She had thought it was impossible, but she could see now that it wasn't. Not after her brother had shown the proof to her just a moment ago. That brittle nature, however, could be fixed. The flames wrapped around her blade as she fed it energy, using the fire of Shunkao to reforge her blade back to normal. As the arrows kept firing, Yuzo shot a glance at Karen, making a nudging motion with her head. Karen got the message, leaping upward and holding her blade with both hands over her shoulders. Getchuga Tenshou. The large wave of fire slammed down behind Ichigo's Zanpakuto, leaving a large cut across the ground in the process. As the flames vanished, however, Ichigo was nowhere to be seen. Heilig Feelha. Yuzo darted away as she heard Ichigo's voice, recognizing how close he was behind her. A burst of Hirin Kyaku got her a fair distance away, joining Karen as her older twin landed by her side. Ichigo continued speaking, though without a care. I've seen that Quincy technique before. A standard one and yet a core component. Licked Regan is simply a mass amount of weak arrows fired at me, right? Correct me if I'm wrong though. I've only ever fought one Quincy, and that's a whole other story there. Yuzo didn't say anything, instead letting her bow disappear as a new one formed. What caught Ichigo's attention was the metallic appearance it took. Ichigo watched as she knocked the recurved bow with a single Heilig feel, though he knew that one could be split into many more in a moment's notice. So this is what the next form of evolution, Ichigo muttered. It's a lot like the bow he used in Let's Still. You're knowledgeable on Quincy techniques? Asked Yuzo suspiciously. Why? I needed to be. Can't go rejecting part of myself, can I? What are you talking about? You're a Shinigami. That's the opposite of what a Quincy can be considered. Ichigo smirked before vanishing, Yuzo and Karen each finding themselves being thrown to opposite sides of the arena as he appeared in between them. Yuzo stared in shock as she quickly recovered, firing an arrow that Ichigo swiftly dodged. That had been Hirin Kyaku. But only a Quincy could use that. So how? How was he using it? Ichigo turned slightly as Karen threw herself towards him, rocketing forward with Shunpo and flames. As she brought her blade round, flames almost exploding off her blade, Ichigo disappeared. But to Karen, he didn't just move quickly. He didn't just dodge. Everyone saw it, and everyone froze as for one brief instance, for that single moment, Ichigo vanished completely. He was just gone, as if he hadn't even been there in the first place. And then he reappeared behind Karen, his hand already pressing against her back despite the flames burning his flesh. Bakuda number 63, Sabaku. A golden chain sprouted into existence from the light around them and wrapped around Karen, binding her tightly. Ichigo examined his handiwork as he walked past Karen, the damaged flesh already healing with any need to check to be sure. Judging by the heat of the flames and the power Karen had, he'd probably have a few minutes before she broke free so long as she remained in her current state of shock. She wouldn't, but it still gave him a brief break from her. She was far too shocked right now to even try anything. What happened? Muttered Yoriyuki, replaying the scene again and again in her head. I was watching him. I was goddamn watching him. How did I lose sight of him? Even for a moment. The phantom step, Kisuk stated in amusement, chuckling to himself once again. I heard about it. Ichigo used it by combining Shunpo and Sonito together in his Bankai to move so fast that it was almost like he simply faded away suddenly. Like a phantom. I get that, but how the hell did he do this? He's not using Bankai. He's using Shunpo to cover a distance and combining it with Sonito's nature to slip past sensors. How the hell does he move so quickly though? I've said it before and I'll say it again. He's not using Bankai. He's not, but you're missing one last step. One last step. Yoriyuki froze, her eyes widening in fear. Kisuk, you didn't. Please tell me you didn't. You've realized it, right? He used Hirin Kyoku for speed. By combining all three aspects, he has perfected that move of his. Or at least for those slower than he is by a significant margin. Now if he were to use it in his Bankai, I'm not even sure what might happen. He might even move fast enough that the enemy won't have even realized he's already left, even if the image of him has yet to vanish. Kisuk, you understand what he is, right? A Shinigami/Hollow hybrid is one thing, but that step further. You created a hybrid. Kisuk noticed the fear intensify in her as she said the name. Such irrational fear for a simple being. And yet I can see where you are coming from. Even I feel a hint of fear when I hear that word. And yet it was necessary. I believe I have produced the winner for this game of ours. Yoriyuki shook her head. Even if you combine the three types of magic, I refuse to believe my students have lost yet. You've simply pushed a tone of power into one form and combining it. But Karen and Yuzu are individuals. They'll bring out the best of each magic and prove they are stronger. As Ichigo took another step towards Yuzu, the girl took one back. She had to keep her distance. There was no way to win in close quarters with him. She saw her brother reclaim his Zanpakuto as he passed it, holding it to one side as he walked. He was confident right now. She could use that. Come to me, she muttered quietly, a faint aura of white energy coating her that was almost invisible to everyone. Everyone but a certain few that could see differently. Ichigo eyed the energy before he glanced towards the figure standing behind Yuzu, a ghostly appearance to the man. Now what are you? Ichigo muttered to himself. Mavis hung off his shoulder, still in her normal invisible to most form, but he knew by Yuzu's widening eyes that she was seeing the girl there for the first time. Interesting. What was the connection here between the two? They weren't like him and Mavis, else Yuzu would have spotted Mavis a while back. It wasn't like the girl made a show of hiding with her habit of hanging off his shoulders. And then suddenly Yuzu vanished. It wasn't like his where she moved quickly and left a massive impact on the mind. No, he sensed her reappearing immediately. Teleportation? It had to be. His sword came round and deflected the arrow from her bow, the Heilig Feel being cut in half. Yuzu vanished again in a blast of energy, almost too flashy to be natural. He had missed that the first time round, too curious in who the man had been. The first place she reappeared was right above him. She fired down and he easily dodged, realizing at the last second that something was wrong with the arrow. At the end, it had looked like Arrowhead had been shaped like a ghost. The moment the arrow hit the ground, a blast of energy shot out all around it, catching Ichigo unaware. Yuzu used the momentary distraction to reappear in front of him and fire another of those arrows, sending him back a further few steps from the explosion. He felt a hand press against his back before some of his magic suddenly vanished, Yuzu gone even as he started swinging the flat side of Zanjutsu round at her. He watched as she reappeared beside Karen, a faint covering of energy around her palm that he recognized as his own. It caused the Kadu he had to fall apart, as if it had received a command from him to release Karen, the girl having simply observed the two of them for a moment rather than trying to speed up the process of escaping. Yuzu didn't absorb the energy she had stolen, however, letting it slip out of her grasp lest she risk getting infected by it. She knew the dangers a hollow posed to her after all, and instant regeneration had been a hollow technique. That ability, Ichigo asked, keeping a guard up. What's it called? He already had an idea where it had come from. The Quincy side of Zanjutsu was whispering words of wisdom to him from within his mind. That power could only be a result of one thing. All Quincy have a gift of some kind, said Yuzo vaguely. I was blessed with this power. The Wraith. The Wraith, huh? So that was what the man was. Someone she had summoned back from the grave to overshadow her? Or was that really the case? She had been able to spot Mavis after all. He could see the man hovering behind Yuzu and something about him seemed familiar. For some reason he doubted this was really a spirit. Yuzu, Karen muttered. Get back. I'm going to go all out. Yuzu froze. You mean you're going to use that? Yes, said Karen as she stepped away from her twin, holding her sword with both hands. Bankai. The whole area around Karen burst into flames, the smaller amounts of her Shunkao being blown away as the flames of her Bankai's release overpowered them completely. The flames slowly started to die down but, instead of vanishing, they were drawn inwards, joining a stream of flames that looped above Karen, starting and ending near her arms. Her entire attire had changed, just like it did with Ichigo's own Bankai. Her hands and feet were clad in orange armor, the ends of which were shaped in a feathery style along with a red gem present over the back of her hands. Her gauntlets extended up towards her boots extended towards her knees, though it was impossible to see fully with the flames alight around them from her ankles upwards. To Ichigo though, he thought he saw chains wrapped around her legs for a brief moment. Her normal Shiakushou had been replaced by a white robe, covering her front and leaving the back and arms exposed to the elements. It continued down to her waist where a slit was present at her sides, allowing her legs freedom of movement rather than the restraint a long dress would have given. Her hair's ribbon vanished, her hair now pulled up into two smaller ponytails with the same style of ribbon tying them up except more ornate in design than the one before. Gold bands wrapped around her arms near her shoulders while a necklace hung around her neck, a small medallion in the center of the red robe. Around her neck as well was another necklace, this one golden and held tightly around her neck rather than the loose one dangling down. Golden loop earrings also were present on her too, one on each ear. Karen shifted the new sword in her hands, the flames looping around her staying in position with the back of her gauntlets. Unlike the large blade of before, this one was small. Very small in fact. Karen held it in one hand rather than the two-handed grip she had used with her previous blade, looking more comfortable with it than the other blade. It was a simple blade, black as if it had been scorched by the flames around her. It was about the length of her arm at most, the blade curving inwards twice to create two sharp points along the blade before it finally curved naturally near the end. A similar pattern happened along the other side of the blade only having one point instead. Part of the guard of the sword made a sharp turn before extending downwards parallel to the hilt itself to give additional protection to Karen's hand. Ol al-Bader Saikwa. Ichigo raised his blade up warily. He didn't want to hurt Karen or Yuzo. He really didn't. But a Bankai was not something that you could beat so easily without getting serious. Not only that but the look of her Bankai resembled his own in the way that it clad the user in energy. He knew from his own experience with his Bankai that it would be unwise to underestimate that small blade. If it was anything like his own then he knew the power of it would be far greater than it seemed. He ignored the cheering of the crowds. This was all a show to them and they could just relax. He couldn't. Preparing himself for Karen's inevitable attack, he watched as she shot forward towards him. She was faster than before, even without Shunkao. Whether she had chosen not to use it anymore, was incapable of using it with her Bankai, or simply was impossible of using with her Bankai, none of it mattered right now. What mattered was she was faster, and he had to act accordingly. Bringing up his Zanpakuto, he was caught by surprise when Karen cut through it like butter. She was fast at bringing her sword back and was already slicing at him again. He was quicker however, his other hand coming out of his pocket and pulling out the smaller blade as he passed. The two blades connected and stopped one another, Karen being unable to cut through the second blade. I really underestimated you there, said Ichigo as he glanced at the broken blade in his right hand. And I was really trying not to, and yet I still got caught off guard. He saw Karen looking at his smaller blade in confusion and decided to humor her with an answer. The smaller blade of my Zanpakuto is not the same as the larger one. I didn't reinforce that Zanjutsu enough, but this Zanjutsu has a lot more strength packed into it as well without focusing. It's got a lot of power condensed into its smaller form. And if I focus with either blade, they become tougher. Watch. Applying pressure, he pushed Karen backwards before slashing at her, Karen dodging backwards with a quick burst of Shunpo. Ichigo debated about using another phantom step to try and end the match quickly, but the issue came from finding a way to end it without harming her or Yuzo. Even just knocking them out was an uncomfortable thought. Looking at the broken blade in his right hand, he brought the smaller blade towards it and tapped the metal against one another. Blue light spread down from the smaller blade and coated the larger one, slowly restoring it to its former state. Gripping both blades, he held them by his sides. Come on then. I'm WA-. Ichigo stopped as he noticed the sudden drop in temperature. It was far too cold, and it hadn't been that cold a moment ago. I see, he muttered. So you're going to use Taoshiro's Bankai against me, are you? He watched as the energy slowly started to leak out of the medallion being held by Yuzo, forming the wings of ice, before he finally made his move. Karen darted into his path only to freeze a second later as he used his phantom step to slip past her. Yuzo aimed up her bow as an arrow of ice generated. He dodged it easily, noticing how it froze the ground that it hit as he passed. Snapping back to reality, Karen shot after Ichigo, flames gathering around the small blade she held as she swiped at him. At the same time Yuzo launched a large dragon of ice forward, the two attacks colliding where Ichigo was. Or at least where he had been. At the last second Ichigo flew upwards, quickly using Hirin Kyaku to move quickly towards Yuzo. She backed off a step as she appeared in front of him before a blade flashed in her eyes. Barely managing to dodge back in time, she raised her bow and fired, multiple arrows being released at once. Dodging them all rapidly, Ichigo was caught unaware when the ice spread upwards, trapping them within a dome of ice. All of the ice around him released spikes from all surfaces, held there by Yuzu and causing Ichigo to pause as he noticed them all. You know, I don't understand how you could use such a disgusting technique, stated Ichigo, letting the larger blade of Zanjutsu rest against his shoulders. Return Taoshiro's Bankai. I won't say it again. He's a dark mage, Yuzu muttered weakly. It's not right. It's driving him mad. And you're causing that pain. Do you really want to make him suffer? You've seen him. Tell me, can you really see him as the kind of person you want to portray him as? Yuzu's hands shook, desperately clutching her bow for support. I can't give it back, she muttered weakly, her voice almost not her own. When she met Ichigo's eyes, he almost jumped back in fear, the blank look that met his own so different from the warmth she had before. I can't. It is needed. Leaning forward from her position on his shoulder, Mavis rubbed a hand under her chin as she stared at the girl. She's been overshadowed again. Ichigo didn't reply, but she knew why he wasn't. He didn't want to appear to be speaking to thin air if the cameras were able to watch and hear. I can sense it still. The wraith is still active. The cameras aren't reaching us in here, by the way. You can speak freely. All right, muttered Ichigo in relief, taking his blade off his shoulders and pointing it at Yuzo. Who the hell are you? You won't interfere? Ice shot down from all angles, leaving no room to dodge as they stabbing right into Ichigo. Instead of trying to block them, he let them hit, only making sure that they missed anything he couldn't recover. That won't work, he stated, the ice that had impaled him being pushed out and clattering to the ground as his wounds regenerated themselves. Tell me who you are. Or I'll force you to stop here. Yuzu raised the medallion as she prepared to command the ice to strike once more. Right as she did, however, Ichigo appeared in front of her, his hand clenched over her own and wrenching the medallion out of her palms. Crushing it with one hand, he brought up a knee and slammed it into her chest, sending her flying out through the breaking ice wall. As the ice broke, he got a glance towards the stands, seeing the energy that had been in the medallion returning to Taoshiro. He could see the pure joy on the man's face as it reached him, the image burying itself in his mind at how happy his student was once again. When he turned back to Yuzo, he found her gone, no sign of where she had moved to. The heat behind him was his immediate answer to what had happened, but he was too late to turn. Karen was already moving her sword from its position by her chest, tilting the blade from its upwards aim towards him. A massive tower of flames moved with her, and the flames that had looped around her before were now gone. Dare Psycha! The torrent of flames shot forward, devouring Ichigo within themselves. Karen took the opportunity to let the flames around her arms reappear, the ones around her feet taking a while too. Both Yuzu and her put some distance between them and the flames just in case. They knew it had hit Ichigo, but they had no idea when he would make his move. He broke the medallion. I think. I'm not sure. It's a bit of a blur. I can't remember too much. Bad time for one of those episodes, Yuzu, Karen muttered quietly. If he survives this, use Volstandig. Yuzu looked at her sister in shock. But dash. No buts. He's too strong to not do this. We'll overpower him with sheer force. Don't forget, we still need to face that other guy after this. Yuzu glanced towards Shinji, the man still sitting to one side and looking like he was enjoying a good show. He gave them a smirk as he noticed them looking at him, realizing they had been talking about him. Don't worry, said Karen reassuringly. You don't have Taoshiro's Bankai to seal it away anymore. Actually, I don't really know if I can use it. Karen looked at her in disbelief. Hey, it's true. I haven't practiced in months. And you know it's not an easy thing to use anyway. Besides, I don't want to lose Mum's ring. Karen shook her head at her sister's reluctance, but she could accept that. Their mum had supposedly had a Sanrei glove at one point in her life but had switched to a ring version of it not long later due to her reluctance to wear the glove full time. She didn't blame her. It would have been a pain if you wanted to take a shower and then accidentally starting deconstructing the walls around you. Besides, muttered Yuzu, I doubt it'll make much difference. If he can beat you, I won't be strong enough. Have some faith. We'll take him down together. Raising her sword over his shoulder, Karen signaled Yuzu. Yuzu knew what her sister wanted, playing along as she created a small blade of energy. She didn't like swords much, but she had a bit of training. Even so, it was easier to make a bow as a weapon rather than a sword, hence this one's lack of solid appearance. It was unfortunate that this technique required a blade to use. Getchuga. Karen began swiping down, Yuzu doing the same. Tenshou. They both sent crescent blades of energy towards the dying inferno, one of flames and the other of pure energy. Yuzu's reached the flames faster than Karen's did, creating a gap. Karen's hit a moment later through the same gap, filling the area with flames once more. That was until a sudden explosion of energy blasted them all away, Ichigo holding the larger blade of his Zanpakuto upwards from a sudden slash. He took a deep breath as he finally got some oxygen again. It had been useful to plan things out within the flames, but it was more painful than he had imagined. A normal person should have run out of the flames. It would have killed a weak person, but then they already knew he wasn't weak. Still, having to restore his lungs over and over again was a really hard process. He had heard the hollow side of Zanjutsu complaining every second of it. The parts of his unhealed skin quickly restored themselves to perfect condition, hiding away some of the bone that had gotten exposed. Maybe he shouldn't have hidden in the flames so long that they even burned away his flesh. The looks from the crowds suggested they were a bit shocked and even scared of him. Well, not that it mattered. Holding the smaller blade to one side, he shocked everyone as a sudden aura of blue energy wrapped around the blade before expanding to 3 times its length. This blade's really bad at containing the energy sometimes. Maybe it's just because I'm drawing it in all too quickly. He smirked as he saw Karen bringing up her sword again, releasing a wave of fire at him. Getchuga Tenshou. With a quick slash, the large amount of energy flew forward, slicing through the flames and barely missing Yuzu and Karen, both of which had darted up into the air. They looked towards Ichigo only to find him gone. Looking for me? Karen spun around just in time to see Ichigo make a small motion with the smaller blade, a thin trail of energy forming a line from the blade's wake. Getchuga Tenshou. Karen's eyes widened again as a massive tone of energy shot forward from the small slash. She brought up her blade to block it, splitting some of the energy but not enough. It caused her to get thrown backwards, hitting the ground hard as the energy exploded around her. "I can't believe it!" exclaimed Chapati. "The tides have turned so suddenly." Ichigo Kurosaki, who has stayed on the defensive for majority of the match, is overpowering both of Mermaid Heel's mages at once. "I'm shocked he can pull of these Getchuga Tenshou attacks so easily," commented Lahar as he watched Ichigo knock Yuzo to the ground with a kick from behind. Karen tried to rush him only to be forced to dodge at the last second from a quick Getchuga Tenshou. There's so little charge time compared to the ones the girls are using, Karen in particular, and yet they give off so much power each. "It's the power of his Zanpakuto," stated Ishine, watching carefully. "All Zanpakuto have some form of ability. Even purely physical ones have something to them. And yet Ichigo's has only let him fire Getchuga Tenshou. Perhaps it has another ability, perhaps it doesn't, but either way, that's not a bad thing." Ishine watched how Ichigo effortlessly fired another of the attacks, forcing Yuzo and Karen to separate from one another. His Zanpakuto has made that into a weapon. It's not like Karen or me who use a Zanpakuto with the ability to use Getchuga Tenshou. He wields a blade that was made for the Getchuga Tenshou. Or at least that's how I see it. Ishine crossed his arms as he noticed Ichigo landing on another side of the arena to the twins, as if wanting a bit of distance between them all. "I wonder. 2 blades. Could he?" As Ichigo landed softly on the ground, he slung the larger of the 2 blades over his shoulders, glancing towards Karen and Yuzo. Both girls were pushing themselves up from being thrown back down to the ground, and they looked like they were trying to get their breath back too from having to dodge him so much. "Are you ready to stop yet?" Karen gritted her teeth as she brought up her blade in front of her. "Never." The flame loop started slowly dying down as a large torrent of flames generated from her sword, the energy swirling around her. Yuzu stood by her side before she brought a hand to the ring she wore, slowly removing it. A burst of energy exploded all around her, obscuring her from sight for a moment. When it cleared, Yuzu hadn't changed too much. A pair of wings now extended from her back, pure white and almost transparent like a ghost. A 5-pointed star hovered over her head like a halo, keeping the design the wings had taken as well. "See," stated Karen, not taking her eyes off Ichigo but still feeling the presence of Yuzu's Vol standing next to her. "I told you that you could do it." There was nothing but silence. "Yuzu? This is not the time for this." Yuzu didn't answer her sister. With Volstandig, her sensing abilities had been enhanced to new heights. She could feel far more of Ichigo's magic than before, and it didn't even seem to end. It extended all around him, going further and further till she lost track of it all. It was like sensing the world itself, and it was made worse by the fact she had sensed something like this before. That time where she had first used this power at home and not when she was far away somewhere training. "Yuzu." Yuzu snapped out of her thoughts, giving Karen a quick acknowledgement as she summoned up her bow, the metal quality of it all gone. In this form it was far more effective right now to simply make use of all the magic around her, summoning up a bow made purely of magic. Sclavere. The earth around her started to break apart, dissolving down into pure particles of magic that were absorbed and compressed into the single arrow knocked on the bow. Having gathered as much magic as she could wield, she let Sclavere end and stopped absorbing the materials around her. Pulling back the bowstring, she waited for Karen to move first, charging ahead of her with the massive torrent of flames wrapped around her blade. "Dare Psycha!" The flames blasted forward, heading right at Ichigo. The moment she was out of sight, hidden by the flames, Karen darted out of the way, Yuzu firing her arrow right down the middle. The arrow shot forward straight through the flames, the force blasting the flames away as it passed and stole energy from them. As it was about to hit Ichigo, however, it vanished, revealing the point of the smaller blade in the arrow's path. "Not bad," said Ichigo as he brought the blade down. "That would have worked, that is if I wasn't a Quincy. Or rather, if I wasn't a hybrid." Yuzu felt a shiver go down her spine. She couldn't understand why, and neither could Karen, but that word gave them a sense of dread, despite not truly understanding its significance. A hybrid. Jura felt his legs go weak as he stepped away from his position overlooking the fight. Kelia looked at him in confusion, frowning at the scared look on his face. "What's wrong, Jura?" "It's nothing," Jura lied, keeping his thoughts to himself. Very few words made someone feel dread like that, and it normally was for a good reason. A hybrid. Just why was that word so terrifying to him? If anything, he should have been scared of the power he was seeing, and yet instead a word was causing this. It was absurd. Now then, Ichigo said as he gripped both blades tightly. I think it's time to end this. Another Getchuga Tenshou. Karen mocked, regaining her nerve as Ichigo raised the smaller blade. Bring it on. Ichigo shook his head. No, I'm afraid this isn't the same as something like that. I suppose none of you have seen this before. I hope you don't regret continuing as far as you did. Making a small slice in the air, a similar trail of energy followed the blade's wake. Anything Karen could try and say was cut off when he suddenly swiped the large blade down through the line, forming a cross. Getchuga Jujishou. Karen froze as the energy exploded towards, the cross of energy expanding in size until it towered over them. She gripped her blade tightly, wanting to move and yet not managing to. Yuzo was the same next to her. They could feel the energy barely contained within the attack, and the sight of it was making them hesitate. What are you doing? Screamed Ichigo, charging forward. Move. His shouting snapped the twins out of their stupor and they tried to move to one side in time. They weren't going to make it though, and the attack crashed into where they were, causing a massive explosion of energy that consumed everything around it. The barrier around the stadium barely held before finally shattering, the audience kept safe by the backup ones that sprung to life, and even they shattered just after the explosion started to die down. The three commenters gripped their seats as the wind from the blast sent things flying, the microphones slipping from the grasps and falling into the arena. The ground near where Karen and Yuzu had been had collapsed in, revealing a large underground mine section from long ago that had been all but forgotten about. Ishine stood from his seat to look for his children, only to sigh in relief, seeing them all on the other side of the arena. What the hell were you two thinking? Muttered Ichigo in annoyance, both girls slung under his arms. He quickly let Karen and Yuzu down before crossing his arms, staring them both down. Why didn't you two move? Did you want to die or something? Karen was the first to finally answer, and she did so by shouting right back at him. Well, what was the big idea of firing such an attack like that if you only wanted us to dodge? Are we that much of a nuisance to you that you'd want us dead? I expected you'd try and move and get caught in the edge of the explosion. You two are the ones who just froze and had to have me save them. Save us. Karen paused as she noticed where they were. They had been right by the center of the explosion when it was about to happen. How had he crossed that distance so quickly? That was far faster than anything he had shown during the rest of the match. How did you? Ichigo shrugged. I can move fast when I want to. Then you. Karen sent a kick straight at Ichigo's shin. You were mocking us, weren't you? Hey. What's that for? For not taking us seriously. Excuse me, who's the one who froze up a minute ago? If I had taken this seriously, then you'd be hurt or dead. Like you'd care. If I didn't, then I'd have had no quarrels with hurting you from the very beginning. Ichigo sighed as she shocked Karen into silence, rubbing his head. You know what, let's just end this already? Give up. Hell no. Then a draw? You won't win here. And if you continue trying to fight me like this, then I'll have no choice left but one. Yuzo placed a hand on Karen's arm, calming her down a bit. Karen shared a look with her before they both came to the same agreement. We'll accept the draw. Ichigo smiled. Great. That saves me having to surrender instead. Wait, what dash? It's over. Exclaimed Chapati, cutting Karen off with the new microphone he had been given. Both teams have accepted a draw. Hey, he tricked Dash. I can't believe it's a draw. What incredible luck, especially since the barriers need to recharge, Chapati said, muttering the last part to himself. Now then, with that the fourth day draws to an end. The screens quickly came up in the arena, displaying all the total scores from the day's activities and previous ones. Let us turn our attention once more to the scores. First, Sabertooth, 46p. Second, Quattro Cerberus, 44p. Third, Fairy Tail A, 39p. Fourth, Fairy Tail B, 36p. Fourth, Mermaid Heel, 36p. 6th, Lamia Scale, 34p. 7th, Raven Tail, 27p. 8th, Garu Knights, 23p. Chapati looked at the scores in amusement. It seems Sabretooth has finally shot up into first, taking a small lead, but the lead nonetheless. Quattro Cerberus however is not far behind, holding second despite their loss of first place. And what a turnaround for Fairy Tail A. They've shot up from 6th to 3rd, even overtaking their other teammates on Fairy Tail B. Even Raven Tail is climbing upwards finally, gaining 16 points. It's still a wide gap, but they might not be out of the running completely tomorrow. Until then everyone. This is the end of the 4th day. Protector of the Fairies. The 4th night. You can go in if you want. Ichigo paused, leaving his thoughts as he noticed the mermaid heel mage next to him. What was her name again? Anna? Andrea? Arana? That last one rang a bell, so it was probably it. Are you sure? They don't need to rest or anything. You've been standing outside our medical ward for an hour now. They are as reluctant to leave like you are, so you might as well go in already. Besides, what do they have to rest from apart from wasting magic? You barely harmed them in that entire match. Ichigo shrugged. I'll go on in then. Thanks. The woman shut the door behind him as he slipped through, quickly compared the medical ward to their own. It was pretty much the same, not much of a surprise really, as he hadn't expected much to be difference. The fact there was only one exit as well was probably why Karen hadn't run off yet to avoid him. Seeing how Yuzu acted, she would have likely said something before running off if she wanted to leave. You're still here, muttered Karen, noticing him as he entered the room. She scowled before crossing her arms. What? Want to rub it in that we couldn't beat you? Want to ridicule us and call us weak? Karen, that's not a nice thing to say, argued Yuzu, her hands on her hips as she stared at her older twin. He waited all this time just to make sure we were okay after all. Karen scoffed. What possible injuries could we have? He treated us like glass for most of the match, and when he finally got serious he did so only with the intent to make us surrender in fear. He's wasting his time here anyway. You know I didn't think you were weak, Ichigo interjected. You two are quite strong. When did you start training anyway? We started when we were 11, supplied Yuzu since Karen didn't seem to want to answer. Your Yuki helped train us because we were dad's kids. And she did say she wanted apprentices. Ichigo chose not to comment on the naive nature of what he heard. He could understand why Yuzu believed it was so simple though. He probably would have had a similar opinion about Kisuke if he had met him like they had met Yoriyuki rather than at his mother's dead body. We actually only joined Mermaid Heel within the past year. So Yoriyuki's been training us almost full time for the past 6 years. That's longer than how long Kisuke trained me for, muttered Ichigo. He picked me up when I was 9 and trained me for only 2 years. Picked you up? Yuzu tilted her head. Is that why you never came back? Ichigo flinched, opening his mouth to respond before Karen beat him to it. That's not what you should be paying attention to, Yuzu. He said he was trained for 2 years. Karen clenched her fists. So if we consider up to the point where you all vanished 7 years ago, where were you for the other 9 years? Ichigo couldn't meet their eyes properly. It was far easier when he was fighting them and could put some of these thoughts to the back of his mind. I had a lot on my mind for a while. I wanted to come and visit. For the longest time. But Ichigo reluctantly forced himself to meet Karen's glare. I was scared. Scared. What a load of bulldash. Karen. Yuzu glared at her sister. Please mind your language, Karen. She turned her attention towards Ichigo, noticing how unsettled he was standing there and talking. It was so much different from the confident person he had been when he had been fighting. Why were you scared? We were two at the start of that gap. What did we do that made you scared? Nothing, Ichigo said hurriedly. It was nothing you two did. I still remember you two when you were both little. Funny really. I have to remind myself that you two aren't those tiny babies I remembered and are actually adults at this point. A bit sad as well. And who's the one who chose to miss out on all that time? Karen. No, it's okay, interrupted Ichigo. She's right. It was my choice. Motivated by fear, I'll admit that, but still my choice. I was afraid you'd all come to hate me. Back then, I placed the blame of Mum's death squarely on my shoulders. In some part of my mind I knew that it wasn't, but I couldn't risk it. I was afraid to come home and see all the happy faces I remembered stained with hatred. Years passed and it just spiraled out of control, you could say. I probably drove Dad mad at times with how much I ended up avoiding him when he was around. Whatever happened to Mum? Yuzu asked quietly. Dad never told us much. He didn't like to talk about it. Ever. And I didn't really want to push for answers when it would hurt him so much in the process. There was an accident. Ichigo shook his head. Well, not entirely an accident, but it wasn't meant to end the way it did. We, me, and her I mean, were on our way back from a mission. She had me tagging along because I pestered her and Dad enough about going somewhere apart from our hometown. They were a bit reluctant to take me anywhere. Yuzu nodded, easily able to relate those experiences with the ones she and Karen had. Dad's the same a bit. He didn't like letting us out of his sight for years. I could tell at times he wasn't okay with Yoryuki, but for the most part he was happy for us to be with her. But he didn't let us ever leave the base he was stationed at unless he or Yoryuki was with us. Ichigo chuckled. That must have been annoying once you got older. I probably had way too much freedom. Ichigo paused as he continued with the darker memories surrounding his mother. We were on our way back when it happened. I assume you are familiar with hollows. Only an idiot wouldn't be when you have our magic, stated Karen in annoyance. That saves time then. There was a hollow there with a lure. It could transform it into anyone, including those in a person's memories. And he must have gotten Mum at some point because I saw Dad. It thought it was odd, but I was young. I was happy to see him. Mum kind of froze behind me and she realized a bit too late what was happening. She got to me in an instant, but her powers failed her at that last moment, and the hollow killed her. Yuzu rubbed her eyes, trying to get rid of the tears forming. Did it? Did it eat her? No. Ichigo said quickly, tightening his grip in anger at the hollow he remembered. No, I killed it. My magic was huge, even as a child. Mum's death was the trauma needed to trigger its release, and the magic that flowed out of my completely disintegrated the hollow before it could do anything else. Ichigo shook his head sadly. It didn't matter much in the end though. Mum was already dead, and then Kisuke took me away with him 3 days later. Why was he there? Karen's voice was ice cold and he knew what she was thinking. He didn't kill her, Karen. But he had a role in it. Ichigo couldn't lie. Yes. Then why dash? Because the reason she died is not his fault. I won't say he didn't want her dead. He had a whole load of weak hollows and hoped her inactivity would have weakened her so he could take me. He gave up that plan when she beat them all back. But when Mum died, she didn't die because she was weak. She died because her powers vanished. And we're meant to believe that. Yes. It wasn't Ichigo that answered but Yuzu, shocking them both. One of the people who helped me with my Quincy powers, Quiljopi, told me a lot about some of the Quincy from the past. He knew a bit about Mum, you see. He knew she had the power, the shield, for instance. It was a reference to her skill with blood venet that manifested in her shrift. He said she was blessed with one of the strongest, if not the strongest, form of blood venet to ever exist. Blood. Ichigo raised a hand up to his sight as a faint pattern of blue lines appeared across the skin. I haven't used it too much, but I've had a bit of practice with both basic forms. Makes it kind of scary to imagine what kind of defense she had when you consider how much power blood can actually give you without being reinforced by a shrift. What about you? Can you use it? Yuzu nodded. A bit. I was using blood artery a lot against you, and then blood venet when you started fighting back. It didn't help as much as I would have wanted. Back to the warden bastard, interrupted Karen. She noticed the looks she was getting before blushing in embarrassment. What? He's a real pain to deal with. Even Dad agrees. It's still not nice to call people names like that, Karen. Quilj was nice to me after all. Yuzu thought back to what she remembered the other Quincy telling her. I remember him saying about a story. A story that originated about 400 years ago? I think that was when it was. This is about the war back then, isn't it? Yuzu looked at Ichigo in surprise. I thought so. How do you dash? I've heard the details from Kisuke, and been to the site of the final battle. If Quilge told you anything, it must have been about a Quincy. And a Quincy capable of stealing one's power would have been extremely powerful. Yuzu nodded. That's correct. Supposedly, this Quincy ruled them all. He was the leader and fought against the Shinigami. What's more, he won. Afterwards, however, legends say he went back to his fortress and went to sleep. I've always wanted to go see the place. I know Mum went at some point, but Dad never let me go. Said he didn't want to leave me alone with Quilge. And for good reason too, pointed out Karen. I don't trust Quilge with you. He's too shady. He also makes far too many insinuations about Shinigami that I don't like. He's nice when you get to know him. He's just a bit proud of his heritage, that's all. He actually said he's a bit envious of me because Mum's family goes all the way back to the Quincy of back then. Doesn't mean he's trustworthy, just means he knows some interesting facts. Karen twisted her head back towards Ichigo before pointing at him angrily. Even if we ignore all those years, I want you to answer me one thing. Why did you finally contact us? Karen dash. No, Yuzu. I want to hear this from his own mouth. Was it all a game? We would have been perfectly fine if we never met you. We would have accepted it as a part of life. But then you went and gave us hope that we'd actually see you. You liked your presence, I suppose. Ichigo asked happily. Don't ignore the problem there. That was 7 years ago. Karen unclenched her fists before grabbing her Zanpakuto, pointing the blade towards Ichigo. Did you intend to just mess with our feelings? Or were you truly planning to come back? If those 7 years never happened, would you have come home? I don't know. Ichigo didn't flinch as Karen brought the blade closer to him. I know that isn't the answer you want to hear, but it's the truth. I didn't know what I was going to do next. It was only because of one of my friends who knew more of the story than the others that helped me take that first step. I suppose I would have tried at least. I just wasn't very courageous when it came to you two and him. Karen slowly lowered her sword before scowling. She didn't seem anywhere near as annoyed as before, and if he listened carefully he could hear her muttering. Damn idiot, why the hell can't he just be easy to hate? Why the hell does he have to have understandable circumstances? Why the hell can't he be a jerk? You're come round to see us again, right? Asked Yuzu hopefully. I know Dad was talking about having us both round after the Grand Magic Games are over, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind having you there too. He's missed you too. Ichigo nodded. I'll do my best, but I may be a bit busy right after the games end. Got a few plans beforehand. Ichigo let himself smile as Yuzu broke off into random tales, occasionally asking him about what their mum was like and what she might have thought of certain things. It felt nicer than he ever thought it would have been, and he wished he could have had the courage to return home years ago. It was far too late at this point to do anything, no matter how much he wished it wasn't. It was far too late. Protector of the Fairies. Fiddling with the strap of armor, Arcadios tried to calm his nerves down. The princess was talking with their benefactor of sorts in the next room. He normally would have been included in the talks, but there was a problem with that at the moment. The princess wanted an identity for their temporary ally, and the man had been willing to oblige so long as only she saw his face and kept it to herself. She could tell him later if she wanted to. She could, but he knew she wouldn't. Princess Hiswai was a prideful person at times, but also could be very straightforward. Her word was her will. A promise was an unbreakable contract in her eyes, or at least when it came to her. She knew others might not hold themselves to the same standards as she did, which was a relief that she was actually aware of that, else the kingdom would probably be in danger at some point during her eventually rule. Right now he distracted himself with the adjustments necessary for the armor in front of him. With the situation growing ever more dangerous and ever closer, he had to be prepared. His current armor wouldn't cut and he couldn't rely on magic since he lacked any of it. All he had was his pure physical capabilities, and that wasn't always enough. He glanced at the clock, keeping track of the time for the other events needed tonight. Ichigo Kurosaka's battle had provided a perfect opportunity when the Shinigami had opened up the mines beneath the arena. They had long been forgotten and abandoned as Crocus developed more efficient methods of transportation along with richer mines, causing it to close down. Or at least that was what the official report on the matter was. He had already sent someone to deliver a message to the fairy tale dragon slayers, enticing them with something they would not be able to resist. After all, how could they? He was promising them a dragon graveyard. Another message had been sent to Mermaid Heel as well, this one done far more subtly than the other one. If he had his information correct, the dragon slayers would likely drag along a friend or two. He was betting on Lucy Heartfilia being there, and that would attract Yukino Aguria. The Garu Knights, if all was going to plan, would be setting up the ambush for the two celestial spirit mages right now. This was a delicate task, however, requiring the utmost care. The dragon slayers were far too deadly to risk fighting. And it wasn't like they could ask them for their cooperation. What they were doing right now was highly illegal in the first place, and getting the help of a guild labeled as dark would only incriminate them more. He'd have to leave it to fate, he decided as the door swung open, Hisui entering the room looking completely composed. If she had been shocked from whoever the man was, it was far too late to see it on her face. She had already hidden any signs of being troubled during the past few minutes. "Your Highness," said Arcadios, more on instinct than anything else. He'd been around long enough to get so used to calling her as such. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Arcadios," Hisui responded swiftly. She turned back to the stranger before patiently waiting, her foot tapping lightly on the ground. "If you would." "Of course, Your Highness." The man reached into his cloak before pulling out a small sheet of paper, unfolding it to reveal a rough sketch of the city. Placing it down carefully in front of them both, he rested an arm on the table as he used his other hand to point at areas surrounding the city. The assault to come will happen from all sides, so long as nothing else major has been changed, of course. There will be no strategy to their reckless charge. In fact, I think Crocus is merely the point where their battles takes place. It's the only reason I can come up with for how so many dragons could have ever appeared. They split into many groups to hide and now plan to continue their war from 400 years ago. No defenses we have would be enough, muttered Hisui. And here the Eclipse Gate comes into play. The Eclipse Cannon. Kind of. It's only possible because of the modifications made with the integration of the Infinity Clock. Using the vast quantity of magical power, the only change for victory is to use it all in a massive pulse of magic. I should be able to sync the energy up with the magic of the dragons, which should limit those who can be targeted by the blast. I'm not sure what will happen to the dragon slayers, possessing magic that can fall under such a category, but I assume the lives of the many take precedence here. Am I correct? Yes. There are only 6 people known to have dragon slayer magic from the guilds here. The city meanwhile has thousands and thousands of innocent and unaware civilians and mages. And that isn't even including the millions spread across Fiori. We must save as many lives as possible. Good. I knew you'd be able to see the truth of the situation. The man pointed at the center of the map, the rough area where the Eclipse Gate would be positioned. Now the dragons came out of the sky at midnight. We have very little time to act, and if they realize the weapon we have, they will destroy it. As such, the gate must open at the exact moment where one day flows into a next. Timing is crucial, but with the Infinity Clock it should be possible to set up an activation timer. All that is left are the keys for the locks. We already have that in hand, said Arcadios gruffly. Measures are currently underway to ensure we capture both celestial spirit mages. Good. If it comes down to it, you might want to kill them. Celestial spirit mages are capable of closing the gate. Their magic is too deeply woven into both the Infinity Clock and the Eclipse Gate for it to deny them. At the very least, you must be very careful. Do not take them lightly. Have no fear. We have it in hand. The man sighed in relief. That's good. Actually, that's really good. I'm glad to see we're going to get a better future. Trust me, the hellhole I come from is far worse than you can imagine. Did the dragons really do that much damage? Asked Arcadios curiously. There must have been resistance. Oh, there was. A hell of a good one. The dragons never stood a chance when those four met. I doubt they really intended to kill the dragons that got too close in the process. The dragons just always ended up getting in the way. The man shivered. You were curious about Ichigo Kurosaki? Why he wasn't there last time? It was on my mind, admitted Hisui. I don't even know what event could have been changed by you to have made him appear. I certainly didn't do anything. There might be another person who headed back too. I don't know though. It's hard to tell. But it doesn't matter since soon the future will be changed. However, make sure you keep eyes on that Shinigami. If he is allowed out of your sight, if he is allowed to run free for even a moment, I don't even want to imagine the chaos he'll cause. He's powerful, but is that all there is to why you are worried? Is it to do with what he called himself? A hybrid. Unlike Arcadios and even Hisui herself, the man didn't shiver or even flinch at the word. I'm not afraid of him because he's a hybrid. Trust me, I am probably one of the few people in the world who can understand what he is and why everyone might fear him because of that. No, I'm telling you to be careful because he scares me for another reason. You already know that I come from 7 years ahead of now. War broke out not long after the dragons attacked, and then it got worse. It didn't take long for Ichigo Kurosaki to abandon all his allies, going on a rampage against any who crossed his path. His hands are covered in more blood than anyone else in the world. He even stole away the title from his pretend butler, becoming the worst criminal to ever appear on the face of Fiori. He, and those other three, they were all monsters. No, they were more than. They were like an unstoppable force of nature, all clashing to see who would win. Every time they fought, more died. That's why you have to be careful. I don't know how capable he is at this moment, but I do remember what he is capable of given time. Arcadios glanced at the princess's worried expression next to him, placing a hand reassuringly on her shoulder. Have no fear, Your Highness. I will ensure all the necessary precautions are in place. He will not be able to act, so long as we don't let him. So don't worry, and do what you believe is right. Hisui nodded, regaining her confidence. Thank you, Arcadios. She turned towards the other man. And thank you too. The sacrifice you must have made to come back to help us all could have only been a high one. Thank you for everything. The man smirked as he bowed his head, hiding the dark expression in his eyes. Princess, it was my utmost pleasure. Protector of the fairies. That went well. Ichigo nodded, vaguely noticing Mavis hovering behind him. Did you do what you needed to do? I couldn't find him or her if that was what you were asking. It's obviously somewhere on her person, the fact it appeared proves that, and now I know what to look for. I can sense its presence, but its actual location is hidden from me. Is it possible there is no lacrima to store it in? It could be a situation like you and me, one being supplied with magic from the other. It's possible. The power of the wraith might allow for a temporary connect to form for it to actually manifest, and the rest of the time it could be either in a drained lacrima or it attached itself to Yuzu in the back of her mind. We did confirm one thing though. Without it there, whoever it is, Yuzu cannot see me. I noticed. You got right up in front of her face at one point and she didn't even blink. Ichigo sighed. I don't like not knowing who that thing is. Nobara, you, and then that one. If it is anything like you and Nobara, then it has definitely got a lot more power able to be used that Yuzu knows about. There's definitely some form of spatial manipulation, muttered Mavis, thinking carefully. Yuzu was able to teleport with its power overshadowing her after all. She was also able to cause small shockwaves to a degree, and that is likely to link back to that same power. Manipulation of the space around her. Ichigo sighed. She shouldn't get involved with this all. Let's hope she doesn't get dragged into this whole mess. With someone like that thing by her side, she may not have a choice. Ichigo. I know. Ichigo paused, the hairs on his neck standing up. We're being watched. Mavis shot to alert, scanning the area. Got him. He's not that far away. I doubt he can hear us. He's just waiting there, almost as if wanting to catch you unaware. Don't worry, said Ichigo after a few seconds. I recognize this magic. Continuing forward, Ichigo stopped just at the edge of the corner before speaking. You know, if you want to talk to me, you don't have to hide from me. I won't run away from this either. Ishine chuckled as he stepped around from his hiding spot. I meant to approach you earlier, but I wasn't sure what to say or do. And then I saw you chatting with Yuzu and Karen a few minutes ago and couldn't help but wait. Reaching a hand up the back of his neck, Ishine scratched it awkwardly. I'm not even sure what to say as well. I mean, it's been 7 years, and I thought you were dead during that time. Ishine clutched his fists before he shot forward, grabbing Ichigo in a large bear hug as his eyes started watering. Thank God you didn't die. Thank God. Ichigo wasn't sure how to react, instead resorting to simply patting his father on the back reassuringly. Even if they took into account where they talked 7 years ago, it wasn't the same as now. They were finally facing one another. I missed you too, Ichigo muttered. You, Karen, Yuzu, I shouldn't have left. Or at the very least I should have come back. I shouldn't have just run away. It's not your fault, Ishine argued back. You were a kid. What's my excuse? I was too afraid you would hate me, and I figured you'd be okay at a guild like Fairy Tail. I had to remind myself of that a few times though when I saw you with Juoshiro. Ichigo separated from Ishine. Juoshiro's a good man. Only partly. You've seen both sides, and just so happened to have him taking his kinder side a lot more on matters concerning you. But I wasn't entirely sure at the beginning. Ishine shook his head, glancing towards the room which Yuzu and Karen were behind and would probably be leaving from soon. I'm glad you got to meet each other again. So am I. Ichigo took a hesitant step past Ishine before stopping. Neither of us has much to say, outside of us both being idiots, so do you mind just keeping me company for a while? For the sake of old times. It'd be my pleasure. Protector of the Fairies. This is the place, right? Natsu scanned the area curiously, observing every nook and cranny in sight. The note had made him far too alert to not do so. It has to be, muttered Gajeel. There were no other ways down here, and the path we are meant to follow is obvious enough. Whoever invited us down here really wants us to see something. Are you sure we should have gone alone? Asked Wendy nervously, the faint glow from her staff helping to light up the cave in unnatural black and white light. I mean, we didn't even tell the master. He would have told us to not go, Natsu responded immediately. He'd think it was a trap. But don't we already think it is one? Yeah. But you feel the same as us. We all just want to know and see the supposed dragon graveyard, and to see if any clue to our parents could be nearby. Wendy sighed. You're right. I hope he doesn't get too mad at us when we get back. He's been on edge recently. What do you expect? Asked Gajeel. We're in neutral territory for the time being, but step out of line too far and we're back to being the enemy. He's right to be wary. It's more than that though. Ever since yesterday, he's been watching everything that moved. I surprised him early and he almost jumped out of his seat, and I think he might have reacted worse if it wasn't for the fact he recognized my voice. He's more nervous than before. Gramps is just tired, called out Laxus from behind them, listening in. He let out a yawn as he trudged along the ground behind them. So am I, for that matter. Remind me again why I'm here. It's payment for helping us, stated Natsu happily, smiling at the grumpy-looking dragon slayer. Besides, today's victory was in part due to you. If it wasn't for you, then Gajeel wouldn't have his lightning iron dragon mode. Some thanks, Laxus grumbled. I'm not interested in a dragon graveyard. My powers come from a lacrima, and I was never trained by a dragon. This won't interest me anywhere near as much as it will you. I'll find it interesting at least, pointed out Toshiro, a joyful smile still glued across his head as he carried Hyorin Meru in his hands. He had said early that he didn't want to leave the blade sheath tonight, as it meant it was harder to communicate with Hyorin Meru if he didn't hold him. Laxus couldn't blame the guy for being happy though. He had leaped at Ichigo the moment he had returned, hugging him and crying while he thanked him profusely. He himself still didn't get the whole Zanpakuto relationship properly, mainly due to never being a Shinigami, but he could tell being separate from a piece of your soul had to be a horrible thing to go through. It was no wonder Toshiro was as happy as he was. He had even invited Kana and Fried to drink with him, making jokes and just acting like there was nothing to worry about anymore. It was nice to see people being able to relax every once in a while. He wished he could. He really did. But it was not to be. Levy's words still waited on his mind from early in the day. The strange unease at times around Ichigo, the unusually actions he did as if trying to hide something, and then there was how much he showed off today as well. That show of display would have put a prime target on the back of his head from every single guild. And yet he didn't even seem worried. Ichigo had actually seemed happy when he had said this to him. Putting the worries to one side for a moment, Laxus turned to the sixth member of their little adventuring group. "Why are you here anyway, Lucy?" Lucy shrugged. Natsu was in such a panic that I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. My curiosity got the better of me a bit, I'm afraid, but it sounds really interesting. We're heading to an area where there may be undeniable proof of the existence of dragons beyond legends and old documents. The average person nowadays doesn't even think about dragons being such dangerous creature. Some even think they were merely stories as so little can be found out about them. There aren't even any records on what they evolved from or anything with the correct level of traits that could be related to them in some way. Well, to each their own, I guess. Laxus brought his arms up behind his head as he let his eyes keep watch on everything around them. I just hope those three don't get too upset when they see the sight to come. Lucy could only nod as she saw the looks on the three dragon slayers ahead of them. They tried to hide it, but they were excited. But that was because they hoped a clue would be there. If any of the dragons ahead were anyone they knew, then the pain would be too horrible to watch. Do you think we should have passed on a message to the dragon slayers at Sabretooth? If they were meant to come, then they would have been invited. This invitation was purposely given to Natsu, there is no doubt about that. I'm just wondering who did it. Considering this passageway opened up because the arena collapsed inwards, it could be anyone. Anyone at least who could be bothered to explore it. That or, well, someone official? Yeah. Anyone who knows anything about the records of Crocus would probably know about this mineshaft being here, so there is a chance someone high up wanted us to come down here. Lucy groaned quietly. Why couldn't we have brought Carla? Her power would have been helpful here. Because this message came so suddenly that Natsu grabbed us and rushed out before he realized he had left Happy behind. And Gajeel and Wendy were too preoccupied with slowing him down to realize that they left Panther Lily and Carla, and by that point they had been gone too long for Carla to follow their trail once she realized they were gone. Laxus shook his head in annoyance, rubbing his brow as he brought his hands back down. I wouldn't mind her being here too, to be honest. She could warn us of any trouble very quickly. So you think something will happen to her? Lucy sighed. Can't we ever catch a break? We're Fairy Tail. I think that answers that question perfectly fine. You like saying that, don't you? Laxus looked at Lucy's smiling face in confusion. We're Fairy Tail. You look so happy to be able to say that. Of course I am, Laxus shot out, a brief hint of red on his cheeks. I've been a fairy tale mage most of my life. Not being one, even for such a short while, was something I don't want to experience again. What was it like back then? Natsu tells me a few of his stories from back then, a lot of them involving Lysina, I might add, but the ones about some of the others are a bit more lacking. And I remember Levy saying she, you, and Ichigo fought together once upon a time. We did, muttered Laxus fondly. How long has it been since then? Over 3 years ago? 10 years if we take into account that 7-year gap, but personally it is only 3 years. Ichigo's little trip in Edalas however pushes it to almost 5 years for him. It's been a long time since Team Fairy fought together. I see the naming skills weren't any better than Natsu's. Not particularly. We got a name and just settled on it. Laxus chuckled. Back then I liked to imagine us three were the true fairies out there, watching each other's back because no one else in the guild would. In reality it was merely Gramps not trusting Ichigo, but you know how minds can work sometimes. We all interpret stuff differently. Still, it must have been fun. Growing up at Fairy Tail, going on adventures. I wish I had joined far earlier than I did, because the time I've spent in this guild, even if it hasn't been as long as it has been for everyone else, has been the greatest part of my life. That's good. I should probably apologize for having Evergreen freezing you and the other girls. I'm sure she hasn't said it outright. She's prideful, just like I am. Students inherit the best and worst from their teachers after all. Hey guys! Called Natsu, interrupting the two talking. We think we've found it up ahead. Not waiting for a response, Natsu rushed ahead, the others trailing behind him at their own pace. Laxus didn't bother speeding up, already knowing what would probably be ahead. He wasn't wrong when the walls widened up into a large cavern, massive bones littering the ground ahead of them. The tunnel that had gone through brought them out to a small ledge overlooking it all, and he didn't need to look at the three in front to know what was going through their minds. None of them are ours, Natsu said finally, after what had been 5 minutes of silence. Too old. Way too old. It's just. I don't like it here. It's unsettling to see so many dragons here, all dead. Did they come here to die? Asked Toshiro, getting a few frowns for his question. Hey, it's a decent thing to ask. There's a lot of bones here, and they don't all look to belong to the same dragons. It is either that or they died here. And the latter implies there is something capable of killing dragons so easily. We could ask them, you know. Wendy got a few strange looks for her statement. When me and Levi went off to train, poor Lyusica gave me some notes Grandini had given to her. She explained to me that she was from Edelas and that she was the version of Grandini in a land where a dragon would not truly exist. Anyway, these spells were ones Grandini meant to teach me but never had time to before she disappeared. Wendy tried not to show how sad those last words made her feel. One of which was the spell I used against Kelia. My secret art technique. That's good and all, Squirt, grumbled Gajeel, but unless you can summon forth the dead then we're out of luck. But I can. All eyes froze on her. There were 2 main spells I learned. The second one is this one. Milky Way. By using my sight and linking into the flow of magic, I can reach into it and pull out the souls of the deceased. By using this, I can call back one of the dragons that died here, and ask them to tell us their story. That's the power of Milky Way. Protector of the Fairies. What a showing! Exclaimed Goldmine, the guild master for Quattro Cerberus. The rest of the guild cheered as he egged them on. They were all overjoyed about their victories in the Grand Magic Games. Kenpeka couldn't be bothered to join in, instead sitting at the edge of the room as he tried to pass some time. He could feel it in his bones. A feeling he rarely got to feel, ever since he had grown to be as strong as he was now. The feeling of anticipation, waiting to fight someone he knew was stronger than him. The last time he had felt like that had been years ago. Kenny? What you thinking? Kenpeka looked down at the small pink-haired girl in front of him, reflexively raising a hand and patting her on the head, taking care not to mess with the bone hair clip she liked to wear. You saw him today, didn't you, Yachiroa? Who? Asked Yachiroa, noticing the faraway look in Kenpeka's eyes. She hadn't seen that look in a long time. That fairy tale mage, Kenpeka muttered, a smile growing across his face. That hybrid. Kenpeka felt his entire body shiver, but it didn't make him any less excited. Even my body reacts with an instinctual and irrational fear. And yet I can't help but shake in excitement too. He's strong. Incredible strong. Stronger than anyone I've ever seen before, and far surpassing Jura. Kenpeka's smile, if it could have widened any more than it already had, would have grown to massive proportions. I thought I was going to be upset at the lackluster battle I had today, especially with him holding back, but this will more than make up for it. You're happy, Kenny? Yachiroa said with a smile. Kenpeka chuckled, patting the girl once more on her head. A lot of people thought Yachiroa was actually his daughter. That wasn't the case. She was just a young girl he once found, no older than 2. Something about her had drawn him to her back then. Whether it was because she was a devil slayer somehow too, a demon, or maybe even something else entirely, he hadn't cared. He had picked her up and named her, and from that day on she had been by his side. Watching as Yachiroa ran off once more, likely to get some sweets, He let his thoughts trail back towards the fights to come tomorrow. Soon, he muttered in excitement. Let's see if anyone out there can beat me. Let's see if I can finally have some fun again. Protector of the fairies. The dragon's tail. And then, said Ishain, a brief laugh escaping his throat as he tried to finish his joke, Byakuya looked Ishain couldn't contain it anymore and just broke down into hysterics. Oh God, his face. It was priceless. I'm not surprised he looked like that, muttered Ichigo. God, I thought you got better after I left. No, you've gotten worse. Ichigo stopped for a moment before he forced himself to continue. Well, she barely controlled you back then. Considering Yuzu's personality and its similarities to Mum's, I guess she was the one who normally reels you in. Of course. Karen doesn't take after either me or your mother though. If anything, she's a big like you were, and I don't even know where that came from. Maybe a distant relative. Definitely not from my side though. Trust me, the Shibas Shibas. Ichigo groaned. I knew I had heard that name before. I took it on in Edalas when I met that world's version of me. Didn't realize that name had stuck around in my memory. If you took the name, you better have done something big. All Shibas are crazy folk. Ishain laughed onto to pause when he saw the amused look on Ichigo's face. Does starting a revolution count? Ishain stared at his son in astonishment for a moment before laughing again, slapping Ichigo on the back. That's my boy. You've definitely a Shiba. Hell no. I'd rather be a Kurosaki. You sure? The Kurosakis get into a hell of a lot more shit from what Masaka told me, said Ishain, chuckling fondly. You know I met your mother because I was on a mission. I messed up, she saved my life, ended up attracting about 30 hollows to us when we took a detour through Hueco Mundo, and then she agreed to go out with me when we finally separated. Ah, those were the times. You're a general if I remember correctly. Anything to say about the past 7 years in that regard? Ishain sighed, a dark look in his eyes as he spoke. It's not the same as it once was. It never is really. Even when I first went back to the Magic Council after you left, it still was different. It changed, but at least then it felt right. But now? Grand Doma does things differently. He does stuff that Juoshiro never did. And these past 7 years have only highlighted the differences between the two. He doesn't bother with the pretense of kindness, and he doesn't pretend to even consider any other options but his own. The counselor role is nothing but a joke nowadays. What happened? I don't know really. Maybe it was the pressure of having to follow Juoshiro after the whole Etherean incident. Juoshiro is one of the most popular chairmen to have ever existed, and anyone who followed that would have been cast in a long shadow. Maybe Grand Doma thinks he can get better results this way, or maybe he just doesn't want to have any of his actions being similar and compared. Whatever the reason is, I don't trust him anywhere near as much as I did Juoshiro. Then why not leave? Asked Ichigo. Ishain frowned. I suppose I could thinking about it. Last time I got roped back in because of Karen and Yuzu. In a way I was threatened, and as much as I like Juoshiro I do still hold that against him. But now, the girls are independent. They don't need my protection anymore, especially as they also belong to a prominent guild. Still, part of me wonders if that would stop Grand Doma if he did ever get an interest in them. Fairy Tail was the most popular guild in the entire world, and he turned their reputation on its head overnight. It's wrong, isn't it? Ichigo tried to avoid clenching his fists. Say, do you think everyone is okay as it is? All this hidden agendas and plots? I doubt they have even noticed what is really going on. Or maybe they have and they chose to ignore it. Ishain froze. The attitude Ichigo had currently was a lot like Shunsui's own opinions on the Magic Council recently. I suppose. But such thoughts are dangerous, Ichigo. Do not forget that, otherwise you'll get in more than just a bit of trouble. With your level of power, combined with your current Dark Mage status as a Fairy Tail mage, I have no doubt Grand Doma would take any opportunity to have you locked up to never see the light of day again. If he can't control the power he sees, he has a habit to either remove it or destroy it. I'm more than aware of how people react to things out of their control, Dad. It's a recurring theme through history, and I've had a bit of time to read up on a few events in the past recently. Ishine sighed. I guess I'll have to trust you to be carefully then. Ishine's eyes flicked to one side as he noticed a familiar shade of white hair nearby. Hey Ryukin. Ichigo watched as Ishine waved happily at a man nearby, said man looking at Ishine in annoyance as he pushed at the bridge of his glasses. Strangely though, he was sure he had seen that face before. Ichigo, said Ishine as Ryukin reluctantly drew closer. Allow me to introduce an old friend of mine. Ryukin Ishida. He's also your uncle, sort of. Ichigo paused, repeating the name multiple times in his head. Wait, hold on. Ishida? As in Uriu's father. I see you've met my foolish son, muttered Ryukin in annoyance. Hell yeah. That guy's a real pain. Way too nosy too. Aw come now Ichigo, teased Ishine. You two were best of friends as babies. Masaki and Ryukin are related to some degree but it is easier to call them cousins for the sake of simplicity. They are both from the last two major Quincy families from the time where the Quincy's king existed, though Ryukin doesn't seem to acknowledge his status very much. Why should I? Running around, playing hero, dressing up in white and saving the day, that is a child's dream. One my son foolishly still holds in his head at some level. I decided long that I would focus on other matters. I see no reason to fight when I can heal instead. Don't listen to this guy. Back in the day, he was all about the pride of the Quincy and about being the best. Ishine looked at his friend in mock sternness. You've changed, old friend. And you haven't. You're still as much of a kid as ever. Hey, I resent that. Now, where was I? Ishine scratched his head. Ah, I remember. Now because Masaki and Ryukin were so close, naturally she grew close to. Ishine trailed off as he looked at Ryukin, the man sighing as he shook his head. Connie. She died at the same time as Masaki did, and if you can say your wife's name happily then I won't break down from hearing her name either. Just had to check, muttered Ishine kindly before looking back towards Ichigo. Masaki and Connie basically got it into their heads when they were pregnant that they would make their sons grow up like brothers. I think they came up with this idea around 2 months into the pregnancy after they had both snuck off somewhere. Masaki never told me where she and Connie went though, saying it wouldn't be right for me to go where she went. I didn't press her for the details. Get to the point already, old man. I'm getting there. Ishine pouted. I don't want to miss anything after all. Now when you were born, I assume Kisuk told you everything about your unique circumstances. Ichigo glanced at Ryukin suspiciously. He knows. I originally took you to Ryukin for help but he couldn't do anything. That's when I went to Kisuk. Yeah. I know the rest then. Alright. Well, it was funny really. The only time you were ever at peace was when Uriu was nearby. I never even told Kisuk this. Part of me reckons it was the additional of another Quincy around your own age that caused your magic to calm down momentarily. It's all I could come up with because Masaka's presence never worked as well as his did, and neither did Ryukin's or Connie's. I swear as well, you two could find each other with unnatural ease, even at that age. Probably would have made hide and seek a bit difficult if you had grown up together. Ishine sighed. But then Masaki and I took you and left, hiding our trail as best as we could. We didn't even tell Ryukin anything. Glancing towards Ryukin, Ishine gave him an apologetic nod. Sorry about that by the way. It was a pleasant time of peace and quiet. You should be apologizing for coming back. What? Come on now Ryukin, you honestly don't mean that do you old buddy? Ryukin scowled at the arm being slung over his shoulders. Let go. The only thing worse than your childish antics is when you are drunk. Ah, don't be embarrassed, said Ishine cheerfully. Best friends ignore all the faults their friends have and turn them into strengths. I really don't think there is much I can work with in your case. Ichigo chuckled as he watched the two bickering back and forth. As much as Ryukin tried to hide it, it was obvious the man wasn't as adverse to his father as he made himself out to be. He wondered what it would have been like, growing up normally and having this Ryukin as an uncle. That would mean that Uriu would have to be acknowledged as his cousin however and right now he didn't want to admit that. Hey mister. Ichigo heard a voice coming from his right, coming down nearer the ground. It sounded like a child's voice. He turned around to see a notepad being thrust into his face, a pen clenched in one of the small hands holding the paper. "You were awesome today. Can I?" The voice trailed off nervously before Ichigo took the paper from the child's hands along with the pen. "It's not a problem," muttered Ichigo, a bit embarrassed at actually being asked for an autograph. This was the first time it had ever happened, even when he had been a member of the Wizard Saints. "Who should I make it out to?" "Lilynet. Lilynet Gingerbug." "Unique name," Ichigo muttered, finally recognizing that the child's voice belonged to a girl. He hadn't been sure, as some boys did have high-pitched voices when they were younger. "Here you go." Handing the girl back the notepad, his eyes froze on the bone-white helmet over her head, covering her left eye. "That's a very interesting helmet there." Ichigo smiled at her, attempting to play it off as mere curiosity. "Can I have a look at it?" The girl stuck out her tongue at him. "Nah. It's mine. You can look at Starcase if you want through. It's not a helmet, but it's cool all the same." "I see. And is Starkey your brother?" Lilynet shook her head. "We're much closer than that." She turned around and waved at a man nearby. The man leaned against one of the nearby buildings, yawning as he finally pushed off it. "You got what you wanted yet, Lilynet?" he asked as he walked over to them. His eyes met Ichigo's as he extended an arm out. "Coyote Starkey. Ichigo Kurosaki." Ichigo briefly shook the other man's arm, letting go quickly and doing his best to hide his analyzing of their magical power. He wished he was better at this sometimes. Kisuke would have done it within moments of laying eyes on them, while with him it took a little while longer. "So you two are fans of Fairy Tail?" "Oh no," said Starkey, shaking his head. "We're more fans of your work." "He's right," added Lilynet. "Gramps told us a lot about you. You met his old friends and family once. Do you remember? He was out that day, which is why you missed him." Ichigo shook his head. "I'm not sure I do." "Eh? Really?" Her voice grew louder, attracting the eyes of the people nearby passing by. A smirk grew across her face, putting Ichigo on guard instantly. "I see. I guess that's the case normally. I mean, you must have killed like 30 people at least then. I heard you spilled enough of their blood that you actually covered yourself in it, all the way from head to toe." Ichigo could feel the eyes on him from all directions. Everyone nearby had heard Lilynet's words. He saw her smirk grow wider and he knew she had done this intentionally. Give it an hour and half the city would know. He could sense the eyes on his back from Ishine and Ryukin too. He wasn't sure if Ishine knew all the details about that first job he ever took from Juoshiro, but if he didn't then he sure did now. "You say some funny things, kid," Ichigo muttered, pretending to be cheerful and to pass it all off as a joke. "Really? I don't think it's very funny. Gramps was so angry at you that day, and he still is now. He really wants to kill you, but of course he's very picky too. He said, and these are his words, that it is pointless to kill a fly, even if it caused harm in the past. I'm sure he'd be more interested now, however. He's been waiting for you to arrive at the same stage as him." "That enough, Lilynet," said Starkey as he clamped a hand over her mouth. "I apologize about her. She lets her mouth get the better of her and starts spilling anything and everything." Dragged Lilynet along, he passed Ichigo without another word. He suddenly paused, however, shooting a few last words towards the Shinigami. "I'd be carefully, Kurosaki. Hell's going to break loose any day now, and you're starting in the center of it all. I'd hate to be in your shoes." Protector of the Fairies. Carefully drawing out another rune in the ground, Wendy wiped her brow before moving on to the next rune. Her staff moved with a trace of wind at its base, keeping the rune's form the same while she set up the spell. With practice she supposed this would be faster. Maybe she'd even be able to summon them up by forming them out of pure wind at the future. Until then, however, she had to do things the old-fashioned way. To be honest with herself, she had no idea if this would even work. This was complex enough as it was, and nothing she had ever done would be anything like this before. She would literally be doing the impossible and bringing someone back to life. Well, that wasn't entirely true now that she thought about it. The spell merely grabbed the souls of the deceased. It was more like she had the ability to help grant others a last wish to settle unfinished businesses. So many people wished they could have changed what they last said to their loved ones when they realized that same person had died only hours later. At the same time, however, she didn't want this ability to become public knowledge. She would have to deny so many people if it did, and she would hate every minute of it. It would be necessary, however. She couldn't bring back anyone for everyone whenever asked. "Fix that rune a bit," muttered Nabera in her ear, his form visible only to her eyes and his voice only audible to her ears. "You've lengthened the top of it a bit too much." She quickly complied, seeing that Nabera was right. A small adjustment brought the rune back to the correct size, and with that she was free to move on to the others. She was almost done now. What would the dragons say when she summoned them? Would they be helpful? Kind? Mean? All she would be doing was bringing them back for a brief while after all. She could not command them to do anything they didn't want to, so if they didn't want to talk then they wouldn't, and there would be nothing she could do about it. That would likely force her to have to summon a new soul, and have to redraw out all the runes again, since it would require restarting the whole process. Nearby Natsu and the others were waiting patiently for her, not rushing her but at the same time trying to hide their looks from her that showed that they wanted her to hurry up. They also were keeping watch. She wasn't the only one to notice it, but there was a smell nearby. Definitely that of a human's, but it was muted somewhat. They could smell the person faintly, but any magical power they might have was being hidden from them. She hoped it wasn't trouble, but the presence of someone else down here with them almost confirmed it to be so. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Nabera asked her, stepping back a bit as she finished the last rune necessary for the spell. "It isn't too late to back out. Doing this spell, it is seen by some as the equivalent of playing God." "If I can help my friends," Wendy whispered back, "then I'll do whatever is needed of me. Besides, I'm a user of sky magic. We are the shamans of magic, are we not? This is no different. I am merely a conduit from which the souls resting in the flow of magic can return temporarily to offer help or to say their last words. Nothing more, nothing less." Nabera smiled proudly. "If that is the conclusion you have come to, then I will not stop you. Do what you believe to be right. Stick to your convictions and follow them through." Finishing the last touches on the spell, Wendy walked towards the center rune before placing her staff's base directly in the center. Nabera vanished once more as she focused, the lacrima on top of the staff glowing brighter as her magic flowed through it. "It's ready," Wendy muttered, loud enough to catch the attention of everyone else. She muttered out a warning to stay back when she noticed them getting closer, not wanting them to be caught up in whatever happened next. Nabera's reassuring presence could be felt in the back of her mind. She could do this. She just had to believe. "O wandering spirits, those who eternally rest in the flow of the world. Lend me your voices, lend me your strength, reveal yourselves to me and show us the truth. I beseech you, appear before me and come back to this world." Milky Way. Green energy burst upwards from the runes, enclosing Wendy in a pillar of green light that stretched to the cave's roof. The light continued much further than she could actually see, however, the people on the surface pausing as the large pillar of green light shot up through the ground and into the sky for all to see. Wendy closed her eyes as she increased her focus. The connection had been made. She could feel it. So many souls, so many lives. They were all within reach, waiting to answer her call and to return to the world for as brief as it would be. But she didn't need all those souls. Right now, she only needed one. Focusing on how she remembered Grandini to be, she looked for the souls that matched similar characteristics. Dragon souls and human souls had a similar feel from what she could sense right now, but there were key differences. After a bit of searching, she finally found one, and one that she was sure was from the graveyard they were standing in. Its aura seemed to resonate with the bones nearby, so it was highly likely this dragon would be the one they needed. Gently guiding the soul, she brought it down from the flow of magic and let it shape its own form. The green energy of her spell died down a lot as it was drawn into the forming dragon, only a small glow from the runes remaining. Wendy didn't move a bit, even as the dragon formed right in front of her. It was still dead, so it wouldn't be able to harm her in the slightest. And she knew that, if she moved from the circle or stopped supplying it with magic, the spell would end and the dragon's soul would return once more. She could only watch as green scales appeared with the aura taking shape, jagged in their appearance. Two long strands of hair flowed down from a forming chin and long almost bat-like ears extended from the top sides of the dragon's head. As the dragon finally finished forming, it let out a large roar, echoing around the caves. That roar slowly morphed into laughter as the dragon leaned down and pressed his head almost against her own. Any closer and he would have phased right through her. So, the dragon spoke, his voice echoing loudly despite how casual he seemed to be. "You are the one who summoned me? The one who requested me to return here?" The dragon moved a claw towards the graveyard but his eyes never left Wendy's. "Tell me, why have you summoned me, shaman? Why have you requested the aid of one such as myself? And why do I sense so much of Grandini within you?" The dragon paused, glancing towards Natsu and Gajeel. "Igneel too. And Metallicana. If I focus enough, I can even sense the lingering presences of Vislaja and Skyadrum somewhere nearby." "Grandini was my mother," Wendy replied. "She taught me Sky Dragon Slayer magic. Natsu and Gajeel were also taught by Igneel and Metallicana." "I see. Your mother, you say? So you are some filthy human she picked up." "Hey!" shouted Natsu. "Don't insult Wendy." "All right," the dragon replied easily. "Can I insult you then? I can't really eat you humans, being dead and all, so I'd like some form of outlet for my hatred of you lot." The dragon raised a claw to the side of its head as it scratched an annoying itch. "And to make matters worse, I'm surrounded by dragon slayers." "Well, only 3 really." The dragon looked at Laxus suspiciously. "I have no idea what you are, but you don't feel the same as those 2. You don't have enough of a dragon's stench on you to be a normal dragon slayer. And there's something else on you too. A touch of something old. Older than I am at least." The dragon's eyes finally came to rest on Lucy. "And what do we have here? A celestial spirit mage? I remember eating one of you. I think he was like the 5th to ever exist. If I was alive I'd eat you right now, just to compare the taste." The dragon's gaze finally fell onto Taushiro. "As for you, I'm not sure either. A dragon slayer? A Shinigami? Or both? You humans really are such sinful creatures." "Please," Wendy patiently asked. "Can you tell us what happened here? Can you tell us how you died?" "Well, that's a very personal question. I don't feel like answering to strangers. My name's Wendy. Wendy Marvel. What's yours?" "Zirconis, the Jade Dragon." "Zirconis, huh? That's a nice name. Now we're not strangers as well. We know each other. Will you tell us now?" "All right." What appeared to be the equivalent of a shrug for a dragon was briefly shown as Zirconis agreed instantly. "You wanted to know what happened here?" "Yes please. As much as you can tell us." "Very well. Take a seat. Old Zirconis here has a story to tell." When the others didn't take a seat he shot them a glare. "Take a seat." The others complied, causing Zirconis to immediately return to his usual state. "That's better. Now, my tale begins 400 years ago, a time where dragons ruled almost everything. We were kings of the world, freely soaring through the skies, dominating all the lands around us, crossing the seas merely for fun." Zirconis's eyes gained a faraway look in them as he remembered the life he once had. It was a prosperous life. For all dragons. Almost everything belonged to us. All but a few things. "Like what?" asked Gajeel. "If you're anything like my old man then you're strong. And even if you aren't as powerful as he was, you still had numbers. So why wasn't the whole world yours?" "I said we were kings. But we were not the only ones with power. There existed those pesky gods, those who embodied the very nature of the element they had dove into. I believe the closer thing you can come to seeing them nowadays is in the form of those who they taught through the work they left behind. The God-slayers." Laxus's eyes widened. Gods actually existed. Not in a typical sense. In reality, they were once humans. They managed however to ascend to our heights, trading away their humanity to become one with the magic they wielded. Even now you can probably find the remnants of them in your world, despite their passing. Have you never encountered creatures known as elementals? I have, muttered Natsu. That fire one was tasty, but it was still a pain to deal with. So you're saying that thing was formed from lingering energy of those old guys, right? Zirconis nodded. Close enough. Then there were demons. Or rather, the issues came from the strongest of them all. The devils. I'm sure you lot have devil slayers for them too. These devils were, once again, humans who threw away their humanity, only in a different way. They gave in to their innermost desires, taking fuel from all the sins of this world, and let me tell you, you humans cause a lot of sin. Lucy tilted her head, a question nagging on her mind. If the gods and devils were a result of humans casting away their humanity, are you the same? Zirconis looked at her. His eyes stared intensely at her, as if looking into her very soul. You are wrong. But then you are also right. Zirconis shook his head. Gods passed on their power through a transfer of energy. Devils normally had some form of method to bring themselves back if killed. Dragons meanwhile could reproduce. I am the offspring of 2 dragons, but the first dragons were, as much as it pains me to admit, humans. Chuckling, Zirconis ignored their shocked expressions. They made the right choice. Humanity is such a weak species. So flawed, so tiny, you are like ants to us. Well, most of you are. Zirconis looked down at his body, a claw coming up and tracing along a faint scar along his chest. There were others. Humans, who for all sakes and purposes should have been gods. They, unlike all of us, kept their humanity every step of the way, even if they might not have regarded themselves as truly human. They never exchanged their old bodies for more power, and they ended up forming small empires that kept areas out of our control. Removing his claw from his chest, Zirconis sighed, breathing out a faint bit of aura-like smoke. The Siritii, home to hundreds and hundreds of Shinigami and led by a man with flames hotter than any fire dragons. Silburn, the ice fortress housing all Quincy, including their king, a man so powerful that all things he understood became useless against him. The Nervits, creators of Nirvana, a weapon capable of turning our own allies against us if provoked. So many civilizations, and yet still small enough for us to leave alone. We found it became easier to leave them to one side, and to keep the rest of the world to ourselves. Or at least, that was what we had intended. Until that man shattered the balance of the world. Zirconis snarled as he slammed his clawed hand down on the ground beside him. That child of darkness, Ziref, the cursed human who gave life to thousands and thousands of demons. They could range from the strength of an ordinary human to ones that rivaled us, and it is likely he created some that could even surpass us. Never before has there been a man so swallowed up by darkness as he was, and we weren't the only ones he influenced. The downfall of the Nervite, the war of Shinigami and Quincy, all events lead back to him. But none of it, not a single bit, could compare to what he did next. Zirconis looked back towards Wendy, leaning closer to her. You wanted to know how I died. Me, and everyone around me, fell at the hands of that horrible monster. Acknowledge. I don't know what element he used, I don't know how strong he truly was, but I know where he began. 400 years ago, us dragons had a bit of a falling out. Half of us wanted to side with humans and make peace with them, half of us wanted to keep them as livestock. I of course sided with the latter. I love eating humans after all. You lot are just so tasty. However, the fools on the other side brought the humans into our war. They taught them Dragon Slayer magic, the only magic that can bypass our body's defenses with ease. There was already a few out there who could kill us through sheer power, overcoming the power our scales gave us, but never before had there been such magic that ignored them completely. The tides turned in an instant. Sighing, Zirconis leaned back away from Wendy as he tilted his body back so his head almost reached the ceiling. But of course you humans are such sinful creatures. You get gifted even a bit of power and you desire more. The dragons that sided with the humans were killed by humanity's greed, because in the end you were like me. You didn't want to share the land with others. You wanted it all for yourselves. And during that time, Ziref made his final move against us. He brought forth Acknowledge. Zirconis shivered at the name. Whether that was his name as a human or not, that was the one he took as a dragon. He dash. Hold on! Shouted Natsu, cutting Zirconis off completely. Human? What are you talking about? Acknowledges a dragon. Unless he did what the original dragons did, muttered Lucy in thought. Did he throw away his humanity too? A loud booming laugh filled the room as Zirconis opened his mouth. You could say that. I have no doubt it was thrown away, whether willingly or not, but he did not do the same as my ancestors. No, he simply bathed in so much Dragon Slayer magic that his body changed. Dragon Slayer magic is merely the altered form of the magic we dragons use, allowing humans to use it. But it is still, at its core, the magic of a dragon. To be honest, I'm surprised when I look at you three. You look more human than any other Dragon Slayer, especially when we considering how long you must have your magic for. I wonder what your secret is. Zirconis let out another laugh. Well, not that it matters. I'm dead. We can become dragons. Asked Wendy in shock. Is that what happens if we use our magic too much? Surely you have noticed those pointed teeth of yours, the enhanced senses, perhaps even one or two more odd traits that don't seem to add up compared to normal humans. That is the early stage of dragonification. If you have not changed any more than this, however, I would assume you are safe. For now at least. I have no words to describe the condition you are in. What about me? Asked Laxus. I gained my Dragon Slayer powers through a lacrima embedded in my body. And I had mine infused into me, added Toshiro. But I haven't taken on any of the characteristics that the others have. Not even sharp teeth. An embedded lacrima, huh? You humans have such strange inventions. But no, I doubt it can affect you in such a state. The magic is likely encased in this shell you call a lacrima. So long as it stays within, you are almost unaffected. I wouldn't be surprised if a few traces leaked through though. A dragon's magic is powerful. Zirconis immediately turned towards Toshiro. As for you, it is odd. Perhaps it is your Zanpakuto. The magic is sealed in such a way that it cannot even affect your body, only your soul. Of course I can only guess. You humans always did so stuff weirdly in my opinion. Thinking for a moment, Zirconis tried to remember where he was in his story. What was the last part I said? Gajeel tried not to sigh in frustration. Acknowledge a being human. Ah yes. Ziref found him when he was still a man. I believe he modified him slightly, or maybe I'm wrong. All I know is that Acknowledge was far stronger than any Dragon Slayer I had ever encountered. One after another, we died. And he spared no dragon. Both sides, both genders, adult and hatchlings, even unborn ones. He went after every single dragon he could find, showing no mercy. I've honestly never seen a human with that much hate for our race in my entire life, and I've caused a lot of pain to people. The more he used his magic too, the more he began to change, and the more power he gained as a result. The rest of the details are what I know merely from watching. I was dead by this point, and by that monster's claws too. The dragons faded away into obscurity, their numbers dwindling to the point where I don't even know if any are still alive anymore. And this is the end of my sad little tale. Did you enjoy it? Wendy shook her. I'm sorry such horrible things happened to you. You would feel sorry for one who would eat you if he was still alive? You're a funny girl, though then again you shamans were always a bit odd like that. Of course it was the fact that any sky dragon would protect you that sparked the idea for cooperation in the first place, and hence started the war. Funny how the most peaceful people were the cause of one of the greatest shows of destruction that this world has ever seen. Thank you for your assistance, Zirconis. My pleasure, shaman. Zirconis vanished in a swirl of green light, the energy fading into the air as the glow from the runes around Wendy died down completely. The light from her staff vanished and Natsu was forced to create flames to keep the area lit up as the others rushed towards Wendy. She was currently kneeling on the ground, clutching her staff tightly. Toshiro reached her first. Are you okay? He asked. I'm fine, she muttered back weakly. Just a bit exhausted. That spell's tougher than you think. You should rest, suggested Natsu. We'll carry you back if you need help. Wendy shook her head, trying to force herself back to her feet. I'll be okay. I just need a bit of time to rest. She gave up on her attempts to stand and fell back to the ground, her staff clattering beside her. So tired. That was pretty good, Squirt, muttered Gajeel, a smirk across his face. And because of you, we know what happened here. Gajeel gave the place a look around before sniffing at the air. I think we should leave. Best not to overstay our welcome. Oh really? Came a voice from the shadows, echoing all around them. You would leave so soon? But I only just got here. How rude of you all. They were all suddenly on high alert, keeping a guard around Wendy's weakened form. Natsu clenched his fists tighter as the flames around his fists intensified. Who's there? How strange. You don't recognize my voice, Natsu? What about you, Gajeel? I suppose a lot more time has passed for me. I can understand that my voice may have changed a bit, but to not even recognize a bit of it? You two wound me. Salamander. Natsu glanced towards Gajeel, hearing the name only he called him by. This voice. Don't you remember? We fought him only a few hours ago. The gears clicked in Natsu's mind. Rogue. Natsu's head snapped around as he tried to pinpoint the man's position. Where are you? He roared at him. Show yourself. And give away by advantage? I think not, Natsu dragged Neil. After all, I had to wait long enough for your little sky dragon to be distracted. If I had gotten any closer before now, I'm sure she would have spotted me in an instant. But she's far too tired to try and look for me now. Am I right? Gajeel swore. Rogue was right. Wendy was in no state to move right now. Even looking around would probably be tough on her in her exhausted state. He didn't know why Rogue was here though. Was he intending to try and weaken their forces for tomorrow? That would be foolish to try alone though. They had already proven to him early that it was impossible with his current level of strength. Natsu wouldn't be able to use his heavenly flame dragon mode down here. Not with all of them around. His control was far better than before, but it still required a bit of work. But even so, that loss there wasn't enough to make them weaker. With Laxus, Taoshiro, and Lucy here too, they were stronger than ever. So what was Rogue planning? There had to be an ulterior motive here. But what? Are you done analyzing my actions, Gajeel? The voice was no longer echoing around the room, instead coming from right behind Gajeel, and the only reason he didn't spin round there and then was because of the small pressure on his back. It wasn't painful by any means, but it was enough to know Rogue had something against his back ready to attack with. The others made no sudden moves either, seeing the dangerous position Gajeel was in as a shadow blade hovered against his back. Rogue reached up with his free hand and moved his hood a bit, not enough to remove it but enough so that they could see some of his face. While the majority of his hair was still black, half of the left side white and far longer it seemed. Over the right side of his face, Rogue's right eye was covered, a scar barely able to be seen crossing over his nose. Black markings wrapped around his left eye, similar in appearance to a dragon flapping its wings. Rogue smirked as he saw them taking in his appearance, and they could see how much older he seemed to be even with that smirk. They all also recognized that cloak too. That was the type designed by Kisuk and given out thanks to Doran Bolt. Well now, shall we have a little chat, my old friends? It has been a long time after all. Over 7 years, but I've returned back to you all once more. And I come with the warnings of the hell to come and the terror caused by the one you call friend. The hybrid, Ichigo Kurosaki. Protector of the fairies. Teleporting between houses, Doran Bolt paused for a moment to catch his breath. The security in the city was much higher than he expected, though not higher than he had theorized as the worst-case scenario. It had all been quiet approaching the city, and the patrols were spread out enough for his teleporting skills to avoid them. Inside the city was another matter. He couldn't just openly teleport, and he had no way of knowing if any civilians would report seeing him or not. Some of them might even be guards in disguise, and that was not a mess he wanted to get into right now. It wouldn't help if they saw him as he was right now anyway. He looked real shady, hiding himself in a large cloak and keeping to the shadows. The large scythe on his back probably didn't help the matter. He wondered if it was the right decision to bring it or not. He rarely took it out with him in the first place due to its potential worth in emergencies and due to how hard it was to use. And yet he had brought it today anyway, as if something inside him had told him to be wary and to be ready for anything. Spotting the inn where Makarov had informed him Fairy Tale was staying at, he made one last jump with his magic, appearing on the roof as he slid across the tiles. He already knew which room Makarov was staying in from the directions given early, which mean he could move quickly in this brief moment of being exposed. Sliding off the edge, he spun round and grabbed the edge of the roof with one hand, his other reaching down to the small gap between the window and the wood beneath it. Lifting it up, he released his grip on the roof's edge as we swung his legs in, landing on the floor inside before reaching out behind him to shut the window once more. The carpet helped soften his landing, so he doubted he had been heard by anyone else in the inn. Everyone who mattered was already in the room with him anyway. Assembled in the room was, including him, 4 people. If he was the first, then Makarov was the second, the old man sitting on the edge of his bed with a frown on his face, deep in thought. The third was Byakhia, the ex-general, giving him a brief nod. Whether that was because of his appearance or skill, he was unsure. The man had a really good poker face. Finally there was Mirti, the woman, relaxing against the door and humming to herself to pass the time. She gave him a brief wave as he settled down on an empty chair, positioning the scythe on his back beside him. Byakhia gave the weapon a suspicious look but didn't have time to say anything before Makarov addressed them all, the old man having finally noticed him. "You came. Good. I was starting to doubt it. There were more patrols than I expected. It took me a bit longer to get around them all." Makarov simply nodded. "Well, you are here now. That's all that matters. Byakhia, if you would." Byakhia cleared his throat before speaking. "After spending the past 4 days investigating, Mirti and I have come to the conclusion that the source of magical power we have sensed before is coming from the palace itself. Getting inside, however, has proven to be another matter entirely. As an ex-general, I have no influence to draw on, not that it would have helped in the first place. And, even with the magic-suppressing cloaks supplied by Doran Bolt, we did not have the necessary skills to break in undetected. That is, until during the fights today. They were really busy with the matches," supplied Mirti helpfully. "The guards around the palace dropped. We think it might have had something to do with Ichigo. They were wary of him fighting, I think, and wanted extra security in case he got out of hand. Mirti is highly likely to be right in this regard. She is very good at reading people. With the weakened security, we took a gamble on an experiment I've been working on specifically to bypass the guards. By using Bakuda number 26, Kyokao, we were able to weave the spell into the cloaks and bend light around us to hide our presence. Combined with our magic being suppressed, it succeeded in making us undetectable to all but touch, sound, and smell, and the latter is something usually requiring very specific magic to make use of. Touch was easy to avoid, but sound was a bit more difficult. As much as we would like them to not, footsteps still create sound. Luckily no one nearby was able to detect such small noises. If they had, we would have knocked them out. They would have no way to link it back to us without proof. We can't ignore the need for carefulness, Mirti. If we can avoid all conflict, we should do so for the time being." "So then," asked Makarov, impatient, "did you find the source of the actual magic?" Byakhia shook his head. "Unfortunately we did not. We have managed to narrow it down to being in the west wing of the palace, but beyond that we are unsure of its precise location within. As we got closer, the magic hiding us began to fail, and it only got worse the closer we got to the source. I believe it is absorbing magic from all nearby sources currently, which meant we could not risk getting any further lest we be detected. As such we pulled out before the final match of the day ended. Though." Makarov frowned at Byakhia's sudden silence. "What is it? What did you find out? I may be mistake. It is dishonorable to distrust our own allies. Nozomi's on our side," exclaimed Mirti in outrage before realizing what she had said, quickly bringing her hands to her mouth to stop her saying any more. "Nozomi?" asked Makarov. "What was she doing there?" "Isn't it obvious?" replied Doran Bolt casually. "Do not forget that it was her, Miss Dogan, and I that originally knew of the strange magical power. It is easy to see that she might be curious to find out what it is, and the timing gives plenty of perfect opportunities for her. Like me, she can teleport, though her method of magic works a lot differently from my own, specializing more in portals and space manipulation than my instant teleportation style. It's not impossible for her to be getting in and out easily, especially when she has experience with stealth too. Pausing, Doran Bolt absently reached into his pocket and pulled out his knife to start fiddling with, spinning it around. All three of us knew when to not use magic. Breaking into the Rune Knight compound required us to be as careful as possible, lest we risk exposing Byakuya's assistance. When you combine our stealth with the cloaks, we can move very quickly and get into places normal people can't. The knife came to a stop as Doran Bolt gestured at Byakuya with it. You may be able to make yourself invisible so you can't be seen, but we made sure that we were skilled enough so that we couldn't be spotted. Even if they looked to where we were, it would be too late. We were already gone, our traces scattered once more. That doesn't explain why she has said nothing till now, however, countered Makarov. She understands that we are curious on this matter. If she has already discovered the source of it, or at least gained some information on it, then why hasn't she shared it with us? Surely she would want to help. Doran Bolt shook his head. You're wrong there in this case. Nozomi normally would share. She's a kind individual, if a bit uncomfortable around others she's unfamiliar with. She would still try and help, however, in all cases but one. And that's right now. The only reason she is keeping it a secret is because she is not doing this on a curious whim. She's obeying her orders like a good little servant. Servant. Come on, you know how she thinks of Ichigo. He's been the pillar that gave her a link to her old world ever since she first appeared in Earthland. She and Miss Dogen ran off with him and Kisuk when everyone else left with me, and even when Ichigo managed to lose Kisuk, she still followed after him and stayed at his side. She and Miss Dogen take orders from no one but Ichigo, and if gives them an order then they are likely to follow it through no matter the cost. Such is the depth of their devotion to him. It's kind of sad in my mind that two such strong individuals only manage to move forward by pledging themselves to a central pillar of support. But that's another matter entirely. Doran Bolt tossed the knife upwards before catching it once more and spinning it around. What is curious here is the important question. I see, stated Byakuya, understanding what Doran Bolt was implying. It is not a matter of why Nozomi did not share this information but instead why Ichigo did not share it or why he did not order her to share it. If he wanted to keep his involvement to a minimum, for whatever reason he is doing this for, then it would have been wiser to have Nozomi relay information to Makarov and to keep his involvement secret. Nozomi's our friend, muttered Mirti harshly. And so is Ichigo. We shouldn't doubt them. Makarov sighed, placing his head in his hands. I don't want to Mirti. Believe me, I've suspected the worst from Ichigo before and it was one of the worst mistakes of my life. But I can't ignore the actual facts this time like I did back then. There is no doubt in my mind that he is acting strangely. Sneaking out late at night, communicating quietly with Nozomi and Miss Dogen, but what really worries me is not the fact that I am worried. It's because Levi, one of his best friends, also sees the same thing that I do. So one of his oldest allies doubts his intentions. Doran Bolt chuckled as he spun the knife faster. That's classic really. Has he become such a monster in this time that he has started to stray from the right path? Byakuya was quick to cut that train of thought off though. No. The Ichigo Kurosaki I know is an honorable man. He does what he believes to be right, even if others would disagree. It's what caused him to protect Miss Dogen all those years ago when I had orders to take him away. That trait of his is part of what defines him, and I do not believe that trait has vanished. No, whatever he is planning is to follow that will of his. What direction that will goes in however is completely unknown, but I do not believe he will betray us. I hope you're right. Bringing the knife to a stop, Doran Bolt threw it at the wall, the blade piecing halfway through it. If you're wrong, we'll be the ones having to clean up the mess. And I already fought him once. Back then I had the help of one of the mages from Grimoire Heart, a man who gained temporary immortality in order to keep fighting for a little while longer. That wasn't anywhere near enough to beat him. Makarov shook his head. For now we just watch. Keep a close eye on Ichigo, but I will not treat him as an enemy until he does something to show himself as one. As Mirdi said, he is our friend. Let us have some faith in him still, even if it wavers a bit. That is all we can do. Looking towards Doran Bolt, Makarov noticed the scythe beside the man. With that out of the way, I have been meaning to ask you something. What is that? Doran Bolt looked at the scythe. This. He lifted the scythe up, revealing it to be as tall as Doran Bolt was. The blade was a dark red and was held to a white staff by what looked to be an almost spider web design, multiple parts sprouting off to attach to the blade and to wrap around it. I got it a while back. It was on a. Doran Bolt looked towards Byakuya and smirked. A reconnaissance mission. I broke into one of the Magic Council's more secure vaults and found this little beauty. It's not my style most of the time and it's a bit annoying to carry, but it does give me one advantage. It's perfect for memory magic. Byakuya eyed the staff with suspicion. I assume that was one of the weapons the Magic Council has found over the years and locked away. Yep. It was like this when I got it. With it, my ability to control and manipulate memories increases drastically. If I wanted to, I could even shear away a person from everyone's memories by simply cutting through them with this scythe. It's a deadly weapon, and I only learned that out through accidental experimentation. He shot an apologetic look at them all as he placed the staff back down. I returned the memories afterwards. It took a few days, however, because at first I got a bit confused at what had happened, and it was only due to comparing notes you could say with Nozomi and Mistogen that I realized something had happened that we hadn't anticipated. What kind of a blade can do such a thing? Asked Makarov curiously, however a trace of suspicion was in his voice as if he already knew what the weapon in front of him was. If I didn't know any better, I'd say it was a dash. A Zanpakuto, cut off Byakuya. It is not in the typical sense. From the records I have seen of these weapons, they are almost identical in construction to a Zanpakuto. No one is truly sure how they are made, but we can at least compare the two to see the similarities. The current hypothesis is that these weapons were created specifically for certain types of magic. If a person came into contact with the unattained form, or the Asachi in Zanpakuto terms, it would evolve into a weapon suited for the main magic in the wielder's soul. Once evolved, no further chances take place, making it a mystery whether or not these blades are merely like Shikai or if they are like Bankai. Byakuya sighed in frustration. Perhaps they are a full release, but the wielders simply lack the ability to truly draw forth its power. Or maybe because they lack an emotional connect with the Shinigami that they are nothing more than empty vessels to increase one's power. Or perhaps no one ever worked out how to release its full power and so it remains as it is. We may never know. You should be careful with such a weapon. It would not do well to abuse such power. He can handle it, said Makarov, utter conviction in his voice. I suppose it is time you learn a bit of the truth yourself, Doran Bolt. Can you show me your right shoulder? Why? Doran Bolt covered the body part in question, not sure himself why he was being so defensive. You took precautions, I see. Your subconscious must have implanted an instinct in your mind to avoid showing that place to anyone else. It must have been a warning to ensure the magic there was never discovered. Please, show me your right shoulder, my child. Slowly relenting, Doran Bolt's hands dropped. No sooner had they done so had a blast of light shot from Makarov's finger and blasted a hole in his shirt. The light carried onto his skin, but it didn't hurt when it hit him, instead breaking an illusion around his arm that not even he had known was there. His expression morphed to shock as a fairy tale mark appeared on his shoulder. You. What have you done? I did nothing of the sort, answered Makarov slowly. You did this out of your own free will in order to fulfill a request of mine. A long time ago, I realized that the Magic Council was acting a bit more aggressively towards Fairy Tail. I knew then that I needed to take action if I was to protect the guild's greatest secret, and I will not reveal it to you no matter how much you ask, so please do not pester me on this. Then there was the matter of a country west of us. I trust one don't need to remind everyone of that threat. But what about this mark? I don't remember dash. Of course you don't. You did this to yourself. I asked you to go undercover. I told you it was a long-term mission and would be so until the time came that your presence there would no longer be needed. Unfortunately, I didn't expect you to go as far as you did. You erased your own memories after you left, and I had to avoid spilling anything the first time I met you again a few months later. You were always a clever child, but also a foolish one for what you did. My memories. I erased them. For a fairy tale. Doran Bold clenched his fists. What was I to you exactly? Did I have friends? Family? Did you consider any of this before you turned me into your own personal spy? It was not my intention for things to turn out as they did. You weren't meant to lose your memories. You were meant to keep your friends and family. That scythe. Just how long has the Magic Council had it? Doran Bold looked at the weapon. I don't know. Records said close to when I first joined. You don't think dash? I do. I believe you might have owned it for a lot longer than when you first broke into that vault. It certainly isn't your own. You said how it didn't fit you very well. But your father was the one who taught you memory magic. If he passed the scythe on to you, and then you used it on yourself, everyone would forget you. Then all you had to do was restore my memories alone, but that could possibly restore the others. But if we consider you the master key, so to speak, it is likely you transferred your memories of yourself over to me to restore my memories of you alone, and then you fabricated the rest in your own head to fill in the gaps. So I was an idiotic fairy tale mage, muttered Doran Bold before chuckling madly. All this time, when I was spying on you lot, it turns out it was really the other way around. That's just gold. I am sorry. If you wish, I can help you regain dash. No. Those memories are from the me of years ago. I don't need the past. Only the future. Whoever I was back then won't change how I am now. If I have been helping you out somehow all these years, then I am happy I could have been of assistance. But I'll keep continuing on from here as Doran Bold. I don't need to regress back. It is your choice. I will keep a hold of your memories until you decide otherwise then. Smiling, Makarov looked proudly at Doran Bold. You are still a true member of Fairy Tale, however. Just know that you never have to be alone if you decide you don't want to be. Fairy Tale will always welcome you home with open arms. You are, after all, one of our most devoted members. Protector of the fairies. A future not sought by any. Ichigo? Really? Laxus scoffed, trying to buy time to think of a way to free Gajeel. Right now the Dragon Slayer was in a dangerous situation, and he doubted he was fast enough to get to Rogue in time to stop him killing Gajeel at this distance. Is that the best story you could come up with? And what's with that ridiculous get-up anyway? Coming from the future? It's ludicrous. Rogue laughed. I suppose it is, isn't it? But then it is also considered an impossible feat, and we all know how that song and dance goes with some of you lot. Ichigo breaks the rules by merely existing after all, and many of you don't seem content to let him have all the fun. What do you mean? Your secret art. Or rather, it should probably be referred to as a legendary spell in reality. A massive lance of condensed lightning, fired at a target to completely obliterate them in one strike. The difference between Kokyujou Tenjin Myuou and the thunder-piercing lance is like night and day, heaven and earth, the sun and the moon. And that is without considering the fairy law-enhanced version of it that you possess, especially in its complete form. Rogue didn't stop with Laxus, turning his head towards Natsu with a sneer. And you? I remember exactly what you were capable of. A dragon slayer with flames so hot that they could wipe out an entire battlefield. Flames so hot that water and ice became physically incapable of dosing them except from the magic of the strongest of the strongest. Everything burned in your path, even yourself, as you brought us close to the end. The last word was far more emphasized than the others, Rogue almost spitting the word out. And you, stated Rogue as he pointed at Taushiro with his free hand. You were frightening too at times, though not to the same extent. The raw power of a Shinigami with the power of a Dragon Slayer. That never was going to be a good mix for anyone, and you showed them just how much that was true. I heard though that you eventually were made an outcast because you could no longer control your magic, the snow and ice eternally falling around you and freezing anyone it touched. You were left alone in that wasteland. Well, not alone so much. I heard that girlfriend of yours stayed with you till the end. I think she lasted a week until her magic ran out and she couldn't hold back the ice, and since the snow stopped only a day after that, it's safe to assume you took your own life shortly afterwards. Rogue next turned to Wendy, the young girl still lying weakly on the ground. You're not much to look at right now. Give it a few years though and you'll truly be a threat. I'd kill you right now but I won't. You can be saved from being enthralled by his will and power. You truly were terrifying in your devotion, blind to what everyone else saw because of your sight. In your eyes he was loved by magic, and that was all that mattered to you, to think he was a good person. All those years and yet still naive. A bad combination with the kind of power you learned to wield and the seals you created with said power. I wonder, maybe I should do something about you now. How about I crush those pretty eyes of yours and reduce you down to the same level as the rest of us ordinary humans, little Miss Shaman? Don't you dare. Rogue paused in his mumbling, looking towards Gajeel in amusement. Ah, Gajeel. You should have seen yourself in the future. Zipping around the battlefield as lightning, drawn to the iron you threw out to easily dispatch large forces of enemies. It truly was a shame when I heard about your death 3 years into the war. I guess the enemies had finally had enough of you, as I heard they cornered you one day and lured you into a trap. They never recovered your body. Maybe it was because it began too unrecognizable to tell, or maybe it was because it was scattered around too much. I heard there was a lot of blood, and there was far too much of it to have been just yours alone. However you died, it must have been one hell of a fight. A laugh escaped Rogue's throat as he noticed how pale Gajeel had gone. Ah yeah, I should remember that. People won't like it if they get told how they died. Don't worry, those events won't come to pass with what I'm doing. Have no fear, my old mentor, I won't let you die this time around. How can we believe you? Demanded Lucy. How can you prove you are from the future? How can I prove it, you ask? Rogue tilted his head, thinking for a moment. What to say, I wonder. What can convince you of the truth? That is such a hard question to answer. You see, I proved myself to some others early with the match results, but that won't work now. You'll just assume I am lying because they are already known to all. Exactly. So why should we dash? Hold on, I'm not done. I know the perfect way to answer this and to prove it all to you. I'll tell you something the rogue of your time cannot possibly know. Sound far to you? Lucy nodded reluctantly. Very good. Now then, here's a very easy one. On Tenro Island, it was Natsu Dragneel who burned the island to the ground due to his inexperience at controlling the heavenly flame dragon mode. Zhang Crow died in the blaze, something Natsu isn't too fond at remembering. You could have guessed that, muttered Natsu, but they all knew his response was weak. Even if Rogue had guessed the first part because of the incident with the Rune Knight headquarters, he shouldn't have known about Zhang Crow. Not enough? I have more, you know. The lacrima Wendy Marvel holds. It has locked away in it the consciousness of the magic, Nirvana. Nabera, I believe, was his name. We once captured and tortured you for information if you want to know. Your screams were quite pleasant to hear after all the lives you took, some by Nabera turning our own men against us to try and save you, but alas, we couldn't enjoy your pain for long. Ichigo Kurosaki allowed you to be captured after all so that you would be taken to one of our major camps. With that location discovered, he broke in and assassinated the man in charge there. Ichigo wouldn't do such a thing, argued Taoshiro. Oh really? Are you sure? Just how well do you know your friend? How much does he trust you? I can see it in your eyes. You doubt him. There's something happening and he doesn't trust you enough to let you in. No, instead I bet you've seen him chatting secretly with his little servants. The butler and the maid, obeying their lord's every whim with utter obedience. No, they are more like dogs than anything else, waiting for a bone or a treat. I don't believe you. Yes you do. You're just trying to deny it. If you're telling the truth, interrupted Lucy, then what about me? What happens to me in the future? Are you sure you want to know? Yes. I see. Well, you caused a lot of pain and suffering. In fact, you are the entire reason Acknowledge was able to act so freely. You shut the gate after all. The gate that is to be this world's salvation. What are you talking about? Lucy demanded urgently, pain seeping into her voice. What did I do? What's coming? Natsu's head snapped towards her. Lucy, don't believe this fool. You can deny it all you want, stated Rogue in amusement. It doesn't matter. In your hearts, you know the truth. You know I'm right. Turning back to Lucy, he sneered at her. You ruined all hope for the future. To this day I still do not understand why you did what you did, but I do know that it must never be allowed to happen again. As such, I must ask that you come with me, Lucy Heartfilia. Lucy's not going anyway. You hear me? She can decide all on her own. Whether she wants to become a savior or a destroyer is entirely up to her. How far she goes down either path though is entirely dependent on if I stop her or not before it is too late. It's too late for you, Rogue. Rogue's head snapped around towards the new voice. It sounded exactly like Lucy's, but she was right in front of him and he hadn't even seen her lips move. Standing at one side near the entrance to one of the side tunnels stood someone cloaked just like he was, the figure raising a left hand to pull the hood down. Standing there was a girl he recognized immediately, but that was impossible. Why was there two of her here? Lucy Heartfilia. Now this is a surprise. Just what are you dash? I know what you are planning, Rogue, cut off the other Lucy, her voice cold as she reached underneath the cloak and pulled out a key. They informed me of what you are planning. They. Rogue snarled, knowing exactly who she was referring to. I see. So they have betrayed me, have they? No matter. I do not need their assistance. This plan will work fine even without their help. But first, shall we play a little, O one who closed the gate of salvation? Pushing them all away with a swipe of his hand, Rogue grabbed the Lucy by him before throwing her against the ground, his shadow consuming her before she had a chance to react. Natsu was too slow to pull her out and she sank into the darkness, Natsu's hand crashing and shattering the ground in anger. Rogue. Leaning to one side, Rogue let Natsu's fist sail over him. The moment the fist passed him, his hand shot out and grabbed Natsu by his arm, swinging him in front of the iron club Gajeel had suddenly formed in a surprise attack. At the same time he sensed Laxus behind him, but he diverted the man's attention as his shadows leaped towards Wendy, the older mage switching targets at the last second and prioritizing Wendy's safety. A pity, Rogue muttered as he watched Laxus rescue the younger girl. It would have been nice to eliminate the risk she poses here, but I suppose it's fine either way. As I said before, I will change the future. And so you're hurt our friends to do so? Asked Natsu, snarling at him as he got back to his feet. Flames burst out around his body, forming his fire drive quickly while Rogue waited. That doesn't sit right with me. Nor me, said Gajeel, lightning sparking around him before he tensed his body, iron spikes shooting out from all sides and piecing everywhere in sight. Very few were sent in the direction of the others, meaning they only had a few to dodge. Rogue meanwhile had nearly twice as many, but he didn't even move to dodge them, instead letting all the spears impale him. Or at least that was what it looked like to everyone else until the iron continued through his body and yet he stayed in the same place. The only sign of what he had done was the flowing darkness around his supposed wounds. That didn't bother Gajeel much though. He already knew what Rogue was capable of. The strength this version of Rogue had though seemed much higher than his younger counterpart. He had to go full on from start. Lightning Iron Dragon mode, release. How long has it been since I saw that power? Rogue muttered fondly to himself. Far too long, I suppose. Thank you for giving me a chance to experience this again, Gajeel. You won't be thanking me after this, stated Gajeel as he shot forward, moving at his top speed as he attempted to smash a blade of iron straight through Rogue's chest. The moment he reappeared, he lunged, Rogue not moving as the attack stabbed through his chest. And why would he need to? The shadows that made up his body merely bent out of the way of the attack, leaving himself unharmed. Not giving up, however, Gajeel shifted to lightning and let himself flow forward towards the iron behind Rogue. If Rogue took on his shadow form, then he knew he couldn't harm him with physical attacks, but he could if he entered a similar form. What Gajeel didn't expect was for the shadows to move out of his grasp, Rogue laughing as Gajeel flew past the time traveler. Really? You think such an old trick will work on me, Gajeel? In case you forgot, I've fought you before. And I'm far stronger than I once was. You really think you can beat me as you are? Maybe not, said Gajeel with a smirk across his face as he reformed. But you're forgetting something. No, I'm not, Rogue replied, dodging both attacks from the side as Natsu and Laxus appeared at his left and right. Acting quickly, he sent a wave of shadows out with a swipe of his hands, blasting the two away. Laxus wasn't sent far before he shifted forms, turning to lightning and using the iron nearby to dart around quickly to points. It was far tougher than he would have liked. If the iron made Gajeel stronger with lightning, then it made him weaker. He'd push through it though, as he was still more than fast enough. The attack he expected to land though was simply caught in one hand by Rogue, the man sighing in disappointment. You're all so weak at this point in time. I expected more opposition, to be honest. After all, the U 7 years from now was one of the strongest mages to ever exist. You even became a true dragon slayer, and I'm sure you know what that means, don't you? Aren't you forgetting someone? Asked Lucy, standing right behind Rogue. The man simply looked over his shoulder at her, frowning. Should you really be getting so close to me? Celestial spirit mages aren't much of a close-range specialist, and you look too much alike to the Lucy Hartfilia of this time to be from beyond a year from now. I'm from 2 days from now. Oh really? That soon? But doesn't that mean you are just as weak compared to me? A smile spread across Lucy's face, setting Rogue on edge. She was in a dangerous situation right now. So why was she smiling like she had the advantage? Aren't you going to ask why I haven't summoned any celestial spirits yet? I'll admit, it has crossed my mind. So why? Lucy's smile grew into a smirk. I already have. The ground beneath them all gave way as Virgo broke through from beneath them. Her appearance was drastically different, however, her normal maid outfit being replaced with a more militaristic appearance, sporting a black jacket and mini-skirt with golden linings. Remember our deal, Miss Hartfilia, Virgo said mockingly as she reached towards her belt and withdrew the chains hanging on it. When this is all over, you let us all go. Do we have a deal? Of course, Lucy said, looking like the very words were causing her pain. When this is all over, I'll release you all from your bonds. I'll never summon you again and I'll let you be free. Excellent. Throwing the chains down, Virgo was surprised when Rogue let himself fall into the shadows from falling debris before hearing a warning. Above. Virgo scoffed before Rogue was knocked out of the way through a tag team of Leo and Taurus. These two were also unlike their normal selves. Leo was instead dressed in golden armor and his hair had grown to much longer lengths, coming to resemble a mane more than anything else. Taurus meanwhile was dressed in a black suit with a gold shirt and purple tie underneath, along with a metal bull mask over his head. In his hands was a small book which quickly morphed into a small hand axe. This man is filthy, Taurus muttered as he landed on the ground. Leo seemed just as annoyed before shrugging. He could have been a woman. I hate women. So pesky and irritating. I can hear you, you know. Pointed out Lucy, knowing the spirit didn't care. He didn't even bother answering her, keeping his eye on the enemy in front of him. Well now, said Rogue as he got to his feet. 3 spirits at once. He paused as he noticed the other shadows nearby. Oh no, I'm wrong. There's even more. 5, 7, 10, 12, 13. I see. All 13 celestial spirits. But how? Summoning 3 is unheard of. To materialize all 13 at once. Just what exactly did you do to yourself? Lucy flinched. I did what was necessary. I see. Rogue smirked sinisterly as he let himself fade into the shadows. I know when I'm outmatched. Even I'm not foolish enough to take all of you on right now and not get away unnoticed. And I don't quite fancy fighting with this many of you. I'll take my leave. No you don't. Natsu lunged at the shadows, but it was too late. The moment Rogue fully merged, he was already gone. And with him, Lucy. Protector of the fairies. It's always so quiet, muttered a dark-haired man as he walked along the dirt path, his eyes curiously taking in his surroundings as they were now. Even quieter than it has ever been, in fact. Is this always how it is? Is this how it was before me? A pair of dark eyes flickered to one side as the man spotted Crocus in the distance. He could have gotten there days ago if needed, but there was something about taking things slower that he found fascinating at times. Pretty soon he wouldn't get to experience such things after all, and he wanted to make the most of it while he could. And right now he was glad he had taken the opportunity to do so. The stars shone brighter above him in the sky than he had ever seen before, and he could amuse himself for hours by simply making out shapes and patterns in them if he wanted to. And then there was the moon, not yet full but definitely close. Tomorrow night would do it, and what a sight it would be. I wonder if they realize, he muttered to himself, able to sense the familiar feeling of a project from so long ago. A failure in the grand scheme of things, but still one that held massive power and potential. And considering how easily he could sense it, hinted at how much power was currently stored within. Letting his gaze land on Crocus, his smile dropped. Now if I didn't have to see you, then it would be perfect. At least I'll get to see Mavis though, so I guess I can put up with it for a day. It's not like I have to deal with it all forever. A slight sound came from nearby, but he didn't bother turning towards it. He already knew about the men hiding nearby, taking cover behind whatever they could find nearby. Rocks, trees, bushes, even bumps in the land where they could use height differences to block his view of them. Fools, all of them. They thought they could sneak up on him. Him? It was laughable, and he couldn't help himself from actually chuckling along as he walked. They all probably thought he was mad, but that suited him fine. He was used to people thinking of him in a variety of ways, none of them nice. Still, they had some nerve to try and hide from him right now. In the day he wouldn't have been so angry. What they were doing was smart. It wasn't good enough to fool him, but the mindset to surprise a superior opponent was a correct one. No, what he couldn't accept was the confidence he could feel radiating off them, thinking they had him fooled while they lay in wait in the darkness. That was his domain. Those who thought they could hide from him in that way were nothing but fools. Fools that couldn't help but piss him off. "Come out," he said quietly, his voice still reaching them all with the underlying coldness behind it. He turned his eyes towards them one by one, both pupils blood red now. "I don't like to be kept waiting." The men exited their hiding places slowly, each of them gripping a weapon. They wore what he assumed to be the uniform of Crocus's forces, but they still didn't seem any threatening than before. They had almost no presence magically. Some of them even looked ready to wet themselves, and he couldn't resist staring at the most nervous one as he watched the man break down into a cold sweat. "What is your business here?" asked one of the soldiers, causing the man to tilt his head at them all. "My business?" He couldn't help but chuckle again. "I don't see why that is any business of yours. Besides, haven't you already decided it doesn't matter? If you truly wanted to know, then you would have approached me earlier. No, you lot were stalking me. You've already decided I'm a threat and plan to eliminate me before I reach Crocus." He chuckled once more before letting a dark expression take over his face. "Unfortunately, you're too much of a fool to realize that you decided to commit suicide." The men around him nervously laughed, trying to act braver than he knew they felt. "Nonsense," said one of them with a shake of his head, his weapon never lowering. "We just want to talk." "Yeah," said another as he stepped forward. "Don't worry, we'll only take up a minute of your time." The man shook his head as the soldiers tried to move closer and closer. "A minute is far too long. I don't like having my time wasted." Ignoring them all, he continued walking, triggering all the men to charge at them. They hadn't even taken a step further when a black aura spread off his body and caught them all within its sweep. Another moment later and their bodies began to fall to the ground, their weapons falling from their hands. "As I said. Fools." The man kept on walking, not seeing the area around all the dead bodies slowly withering away too till nothing remained. His gaze had already returned to Crocus as he leisurely made his way towards where he knew that accursed hybrid would be, and with him the being he wished that stayed by his side. "What will I be shown tomorrow?" Ziraf asked himself with a smirk. "Maybe I'll even find out the answer to why the world has been spinning so much, going back and forth like a tug of war performed by children. Who, I wonder, has been using my gate to do such naughty things? Protector of the fairies. So let me get this straight," said Natsu, crossing his arms. "You." Natsu pointed at the Lucy in front of him. "Are from the future. 2 days from now. Yes. And you came back to try and change the future. Yes. From 10,000 dragons. Lucy looked down. When you say it like that, I can see why you have trouble believing me. The others looked amongst themselves before shaking their heads. We believe you, said Wendy reassuringly, finally recovered enough to support herself on her own. We're friends and I don't think friends would lie to one another with something like this. She's right, added Natsu. The Lucy I know is far too kind to pull a prank like this, and even if the 2 days were pure hell I doubt it would be enough to change that part of you. A small happy smile appeared on Lucy's face that she quickly tried to hide, doing the same with her tears too. Laxus eyed her left arm suspiciously. She had only used that one arm for everything, and the way he remembered it he was sure he had seen Lucy using her right hand most of the time. Of course he didn't know her very well, but he had seen her fight at least. This Lucy was more like a mirror of that Lucy. So then, he began, Rogue is also from the future. Lucy nodded. He must have come from a different point in time. Perhaps further along the timeline, though I suspect perhaps he came back as a result of me. I'm not sure what my presence will cause and what his will cause too, but the presence of us both is sure to change things. And that's not including the 2 others. Others? There are more. Lucy nodded again, holding up 2 fingers. I don't know who those 2 are. Their voices sounded weird to me, like they were being distorted. I think I might have known them from somewhere, hence why they hid them. I'm not sure why though, but at least they are on our side from the look of it. They told me about what Rogue was planning and what he would do. If Rogue is truly from the events I cause, then perhaps they are from the results that Rogue will cause. What about what Rogue said? Asked Gajeel, crossing his arms. That stuff about the future and war. Lucy could only shake her head. I'm sorry, she muttered. I'm only 2 days from now, remember. I don't know if that was a result of his timeline alone or if that is also in mine. So I don't know if he was lying about that or not. For all we know, it could have been an elaborate trick to fool you lot into helping him. Though. Lucy shook her head again. No, I doubt it was really real. Such a thing can't be. Not when there are all those dragons out there. I think he wanted to unsettle you. Laxus wasn't so sure about that, careful to not let the distrust appear on his face. It was not that he doubted Lucy here. Her words were too honest to not be truthful. The same from her stance and attitude. But that didn't mean she was right. When Rogue had spoken, it was almost like the man had been looking far away instead of at them. And if that was the case, then what did that mean for them? What did it mean for Ichigo? Was he really going to turn against them all? He scoffed at the idea. Ichigo? Yeah, right. He knew Ichigo. That guy was too loyal to his friends to ever fight against them. Even if he had been acting weird recently, that part of him was still the same. But even if Rogue was wrong with that point, it didn't stop the other parts being right. He had talked quite accurately about some of their strengths and stated the level they might be at, and he knew that Rogue had at least been correct with Gajeel and Natsu. He had helped the 2 for 3 months, so he had a good grasp on their future growth. So, what was to be done now? He voiced that question out loud, asking Lucy exactly what Lucy believed Rogue was after. Lucy tilted her head at the question before thinking carefully. If I remember correctly, the other 2 said he plans to control the dragons that come through the gate, and I know they will come through because that is what they did do in my time. That's what we used to come back, so you know. The Eclipse Gate. It's a creation of Zeref's. Zeref. Lucy winced, backing away from Laxus a bit. I know, it's probably not something we should have used. But we had no choice. We couldn't accept the future as it was. Not as the hell it was becoming in just 2 days. Imagine what it would have been like after a week alone. The other 2 said that he is fooling the princess into believing the gate can be used as a cannon against the force of dragons approaching Crocus. I don't know if it can be used as one or not, but there will be no dragons except from within. He'll lure them all through the gate and then take control. This was where Lucy halted in her explanation. I don't know how he plans to take control of them. It's already so improbably that he could do such a thing, but he must be able to if he is willing to risk this much. It's foolish, and yet And yet doable, finished Gajeel gruffly. He must have found some magic to bind them to his will. That kind of magic shouldn't be possible in normal terms, but then dragons are hardly normal. I'm sure some form of magic exists out there that can do it. There always is. Maybe some kind of anti-dragon magic beyond Dragon Slayer magic, or some kind of spell only the strongest of the strongest Dragon Slayers could wield. That's what I thought. Lucy clenched her exposed hand into a fist. We can't let him destroy everything, because he will do just that. He'll make himself king and rule everything through fear. It'll be a horrible existence. Don't worry, said Natsu with a beaming smile. We won't let him destroy this future. You can count on us, Lucy. Lucy quickly looked down to hide how absolutely happy she was, not wanting to be embarrassed. Thank you. Thank you, Natsu. Natsu's only response was another grin. Laxus though wasn't done yet. What were those spirits anyway? Lucy flinched. They are I should probably say they are the celestial spirits of the zodiac. The only problem is the eclipse gate did something to them on the journey. They became opposites of themselves, and they are only obeying me right now because of a deal I've made. They know I won't live very long anyway. I have at most 3 more days till I die. I think they agreed to serve me out of pity more than anything else. What? Natsu lunged forward and grabbed her by his shoulders, forcing her to look into his eyes. What's wrong? What's the matter? Wendy can heal you, right? If not, we have poor Lyosika and I'm sure others. Lucy cut Natsu off by pushing him roughly back with her left hand. They can't heal me, said Lucy, ashamed to even look at him before she reached towards her cloak and moved it out of the way. Then she reached for her top before she started to pull it up. The males present tried to avert their eyes, Wendy also blushing heavily, until they saw what was remaining of her chest. A large lacrima took up most of the exposed skin, glowing a bright red that indicated towards the amount of magical power stored within. Her right arm could be seen to be nothing but an ugly stump, covered by a layer of bandages without even the time to treat the wound. From the lacrima it looked almost like there were wires sprouting off it and into her skin, replacing some of the nerves and veins in her body. What's happened to you, Lucy? Asked Natsu in shock. Who did this to you? Kisuke Urahara, Lucy muttered. I asked, she added when she saw the furious looks on the faces of the others. You see, not many of us were left, and I didn't know how to use the eclipse gate. He wanted to go, but he knew he had to stay behind to manage the gate. He arrived only after all the carnage was over, you see. He found me half dead under a pile of rubble, my arm already beyond saving. With his expert knowledge, he managed to work out how to change the gate's time and used the remaining energy within it to send me back as far as he could. Even that only equated to a few days at most, but it was enough. Lucy took another look down at her body before pulling her shirt back down and hiding herself again with the cloak. We knew, however, that I was not the ideal person to send back. I'm not the strongest. It should have been someone like Gajeel who went back, or Laxus. Someone with power and smarts. I had the latter, but my magical power in relation to the number of spirits I could summon would pose a problem. So I asked Kisuke if he could expand my magical power. And he said yes, muttered Laxus in horror. Lucy could only nod. Yes. The cost would be my life, however, as I said before. He replaced all my internal organs with machinery dedicated to pumping magic around my body, along with removing the original source of my magical power. Everything needs magic to live, and this device cannot absorb magic like humans can. It needs to be plugged in and filled up, and I'm not sure if that can still be done now that it's been fused to me. It has far more magic stored within than I ever had in 2 full weeks. I can summon all the spirits of the zodiac to my side multiple times over, but there is still a limit to the time I can do that for. And my body is already rejecting this lacrima too. Whether the magic runs out first or my body breaks down, I will still die. That will not change. Putting on a smile, Lucy looked directly at Natsu. But at least I can see you all again. That's worth all the pain in the world. I can die. A slap hit her across her face, Lucy slowly bringing her hand up to her red cheek. Natsu glared at her furiously before grabbing her. Never say that. Don't you dare give up on living. So what if you think it's all over? Don't decide that all on your own. There's time, right? Then we'll find a way to make sure you live. I promise you, Lucy. I won't let you die. Lucy couldn't stop the tears that fell, her now non-existent heart begging for this single dream. You shouldn't give me such hope, she whispered, though the happiness in her voice suggested otherwise. But how? How can you save me? They all heard the unspoken question. What could they do when they barely understood what had happened to her? Kisukura Hera, said Laxus, catching Lucy's attention. You said he did this to you, right? That means he already had this knowledge if he did it so quickly. Then the only solution is to take you to him. He'll be the one to know if we can save you or not. Lucy's eyes widened in shock. He's here? But something must have changed for us because of Rogue if he turned up now. I just wonder why he didn't turn up for you. I mean, he showed up in the first place because Ichigo was competing and he has spent way too long hunting him down to not go and see him. Lucy winced. That's really the thing. She looked at Laxus sadly, knowing she would be unable to answer anything else on the matter than this. Laxus, Ichigo wasn't present in my timeline. When I saw him fighting in the Grand Magic Games, and when I learned he had been there since day one, I almost felt my heart, well, you know what I mean, stop. And I still can't understand why he is here. Rogue and I didn't come back that far overall. Ichigo shouldn't be here, huh? Laxus let out a laugh, but it sounded hollow with the suspicion felt by all. He's always doing impossible things, isn't he? And you said the two others who told you about Rogue disguised this voices? You said you thought they did it because you would recognize them. Lucy nodded. You think There's only one possibility, said Laxus with a nod. Were they male? Female? 1 and 1. Lucy nodded at the last. The taller of the two was definitely male. The shorter was female. They definitely seemed to know each other well. They stuck close to each other, as if familiar, fighting side by side. And who else would follow him to hell but the loyal maid, Laxus muttered, remembering what Rogue said earlier about Mistogen and Nozomi. Nozomi would likely follow him without a word or thought about the consequences. Who else could those two be but Ichigo and Nozomi? That certain explains why Ichigo seemed so much stronger as well. No matter how fast he has grown, 3 months doesn't seem long enough. He would have needed at least 2 years for the massive jump in skill and, factoring in the Eclipse Gate, it makes sense. He's been sneaking around as well, and I think now we know. What he's after is the Eclipse Gate, and if I know Ichigo then he has only one plan. To destroy it. Protector of the Fairies. It's quite late, isn't it, Arcadios? Arcadios froze as he recognized his king's voice, turning around quickly and kneeling before the small man. Your Majesty No need to be so formal with me right now, said Toma, currently still wearing the remains of his outfit as motto, the pumpkin referee. Passing the man as he neared the edge of the balcony, Toma looked towards the large arena in the distance. Maintenance is going slow over there. Arcadios nodded, not letting anything though his stoic expression. It should be completed by the beginning of the last event, he promised. We are redirecting excess magical power that we gathered towards the spells to reconstruct the arena and the necessary parts for tomorrow. Toma chuckled. I still can't believe we have managed to gather all the magical power necessary. Ichigo Kurosake, despite my wariness of him, has proven to be excellent help. The gate right now is filled with his magical power, and it is stronger than we even anticipated. It's pushed all the other magic out and, despite what appears to be a smaller quantity to the basic sensors, it actually powering the gate more efficiently than before. It's like his magic is a higher quality than the others from before it, matching up a lot more with the energy the gate is meant to use. It has been a good day, agreed Arcadios, his mind agreeing for other reasons. Right now Lucy was locked away in the palace where the king would not look, and Yukino was with her too. As they had expected, they had caught the other girl on her way to go after Lucy, though he hadn't expected their benefactor to deliver Lucy himself. He still didn't trust the man much, but at least now they had all 13 keys to open the gate. All he had to do was ensure that the king didn't learn of the two until the princess could use the gate. It's curious really. The people I have examining the magic say it is similar to the legendary spells in its quality, only far richer than them all put together. I wish I truly could understand the significance of this all, but it is still a bit of a mystery to me. What worries me too is how easily the gate accepts the energy too. If I didn't know any better, I'd say his energy had taken on a similar trait of Ziraf's own. Not the death aspect, mind you, but the kind of ungodly feeling the man was meant to have given off with his magic. What to do about this, I wonder? Leave it to us, your majesty, said Arcadios simply. It is our job to find these things out for you and inform you. It's always fun to learn things firsthand. Something though, Arcadios, countered the king. I could do it so much more when I was a prince and had 3 brothers. I was never watched too much back then as the youngest, or at least I wasn't until they all started to die off. This world can be cruel sometimes, and I'm glad Hiswai has been spared from the worst of it. Toma shot a look towards Arcadios. You will protect her, right? No matter what happens. For a second Arcadios, though the king knew of what they were planning. He quickly pushed that thought out of his head as quickly as it came. How would his majesty know anyway? Nodding, he gave the king his word. Have no fear, your majesty, he said, bowing his head. I will protect the princess to my dying breath. Thank you, Arcadios. I can always count on you. Never before had those words cut Arcadios so much, and he knew the king didn't mean for them to do so. He could only nod and bow for now. For his princess, he would do anything. Even it meant sacrificing his honor to her father himself. Protector of the fairies. Fire and ice, the battle begins. So this is it, muttered Laxus, his eyes observing the growing crowds as they filled the arena's stands. Unlike normally, all the teams had been told to assemble in the arena itself. The whole place was filled with a mix of excitement, anticipation, and hatred. He couldn't help but be amazed that some of them were able to restrain themselves, in particular Kagura. There were others who were less furious and more insane in his mind though, in particular Kenpei Kazaraki, who was currently staring at Ichigo as if he was his prey. He didn't like that, and if he could help it then he'd intercept Kenpei before he could reach Ichigo. Surprisingly, Yukino wasn't present. That didn't seem good considering what the future Lucy had told them. The Eclipse Gate could only be opened with all the Celestial Spirit Keys. If Yukino was no longer here, did that mean she had been captured as well? He'd ask, but he couldn't think of a way to do it without drawing attention to himself, especially with the suspicion the Garu Knights seemed to have of them all. Their looks were too wary to be normal. He wished they could be acting on the information the future Lucy had given them, but the guards were too numerous to beat quickly to reach the king. They would have to win today and meet him right afterwards when he would grant their wish and use that time to get him to stop the gates opening. If they were too late then the future they had been warned about would come to pass, and he refused to allow that to happen. He shot a glance to Ichigo, his longtime friend, not noticing as he chatted cheerfully with Wendy. He couldn't believe that Ichigo had come back in time like Lucy had, but there was no other alternative. Lucy had said that he had not been with them in her timeline, so it made him wonder what might have gone wrong that warranted Ichigo to come back too. First Lucy, then Rogue, and then Ichigo. What would the actions of Ichigo being present cause? Or would he simply cause another loop with another person coming back too? It wasn't a nice feeling to think about. He didn't want to doubt Ichigo either, but he couldn't help but keep wondering why he had not trusted them with this knowledge. He had informed the master when they got back last night, and a select few had also been informed too, mainly those who were part of their team. He had also personally informed Levi, but they had held off telling Ichigo, and the ones they knew would share that info with Ichigo. Something still felt off to him, and he goddamn hated feeling like that too. If Ichigo shared what he knew, however, he wouldn't hesitate to cooperate too. He glanced warily at Ichigo as he saw him hand a small bottle to Wendy, barely the size of her palm. She looked at him in confusion before he muttered a few words in her ears, and her face lit up in both shock and awe. Her hand clutched the bottle tightly as she quickly hid it away, and he wondered what exactly Ichigo had given her to make her act like that. It didn't look like there was much in there in the first place. He sighed, trying to focus on other stuff. The more he thought about Ichigo's reasons, the more he would get suspicious, and he didn't want that. Instead he turned his attention to Mermaid Heel's replacement mage, her hair styled up like cat. Wait, that wasn't hair. His eyes widened in shock as he took in the details on her head. Those were really ears. He knew some forms of magic caused changes in physiology, Dragon Slayer magic being the prime example of that, but they were still rare to see. 2 red tattoos were on either side of her face, probably meant to represent whiskers to go with the cat theme. She even had a bell around her neck on a choker along with having a tail on the back of her shorts, one which made him question whether it was real or not. The rest of what she wore seemed to excite a lot of the male members of the crowds if the drooling stares she was getting from many near the edge of the arena was any indication. She had a large cloak covering most of her, but underneath that was nothing short of a black bikini and some black and blue striped leggings. She also had a pair of black gloves on, which made him question if she had any other cat characteristics hidden underneath them. "That's Miliana," stated Urza, having approached Laxus after noticing him staring at her friend. "She must be replacing Yukino. You know what that means, right?" Laxus nodded, not saying anything with so many people nearby. Instead he settled for the next best thing on his mind. "Is her magic cat related?" Urza chuckled. "That wouldn't surprise me. Miliana has always loved cats. The cuter the better. I remember what she was like after we met once again with Happy. She actually stole him from Natsu along with me when I was abducted." "You know," muttered Laxus, noticing how Miliana didn't seem to be looking away from Miss Doggin, "she doesn't seem to be wanting to say hello to an old friend such as yourself." Urza looked down sadly. "She was like me. We were both people who suffered at the hands of the cult of Zeref, and then at the hands of Miss Doggin, or rather Jalal as he was back then. Those memories aren't good ones, and now she's seeing the man she hates on our team and fighting by our side. She doesn't want to try and forgive him. Well, I can't blame her. He did terrible things. You barely tolerate him." "Yes, and only because he has changed. Don't misunderstand, I would still want him to pay for what he did. He is merely running away from his past right now. But he's also one of Ichigo's most important people. He waited 7 years for him, and that makes it hard to hate him at times too when he acts so loyally to those he considers friends. Would you give him to the Magic Council right now? If you had the choice." Urza sighed, not giving a definite answer. "I can't judge him as he is. This isn't someone who I can understand well enough to decide his fate. This day is going to be interesting." Laxus couldn't help but agree with her. Waiting the last bit of time till the games began, all eyes were suddenly drawn upwards as large screens appeared in the sky. First, Sabertooth, 46p. Second, Quattro Cerberus, 44p. Third, Fairy Tail A, 39p. Fourth, Fairy Tail B, 36p. Fourth, Mermaid Heel, 36p. Sixth, Lamia Scale, 34p. Seventh, Raven Tail, 27p. Eighth, Garu Knights, 23p. "Welcome everyone," Chapati called out from somewhere. Laxus looked around as he tried to identify the source of the excitable man, only to find him and the other commenters absent from their normal box. To the final day of the Grand Magic Games. The crowd let out a large cheer and Laxus crossed his arms in annoyance. He wanted it to start already, and where the hell was the man? "We've had to take a few special measures for the games today. Because of the power shown this year, we have enlisted the help of some experts to increase the barrier's strength around you all. Please thank the Magic Council for loaning us some of their generals for today. Firstly, Ishine Kurosaki." Ishine raised a hand and waved at everyone around him before settling back down, keeping a careful gaze on the edge of the barrier in front of him that was slowly being generated. Next, Shunsui Kyoraku. Shunsui tipped his hat at the woman nearby before Naneo hit him with a clipboard from behind. And now, the helpful hands of the wizard saint, Yoryuki Shihaorin. Yoryuki laughed happily as eyes were drawn to her, giving them all a smirk. "With these three, and the increased power being used to strengthen the barriers, your safety is better than it has ever been. All that is left is for you all to enjoy today's events. Now then, I will explain the rules." The sound of Chapati's throat being cleared could be heard before he continued. "All teams should have had to have filled in a sheet before entering today, each taking the name of a piece of chess. King, Queen, Knight, Bishop, Rook. I assume many of you have already realized the significance of this all, but I will now explain it for those who haven't. Today's event is a free-for-all with the teams, and we want to allow every team to have a chance to win, no matter how slim. Therefore, there is a number of points available for defeating an enemy. A new screen quickly replaced the old one, showing the names of the 5 pieces along with a set of points next to them. Those who took on the name of bishop or rook are worth exactly 1 point. The knight is worth double that, making them a much more worthwhile target if you can figure out who is who. The queen, however, is worth 3 points, making them triple the bishop and rook, and the king is worth a grand total of 5 points. The winner will be the team with the most points at the end, so the points you gained until now will give you a significant advantage over those who lost them. Laxus glanced around everyone quickly, understanding the significance of it all. With a different point setup, the best way to win would be go after either as many mages as possible that were weak or to go for as many of the strong kings and queens that they could. With the way their team was set up, Ichigo was currently the king, a standard choice for the strongest. He was sure others had chosen similar positions for their strongest. Unless they wanted to trip the enemy up, however. Place the weak as the king and let the strongest fight freely and lose eventually at the cost of only a single point. That is not all, however, called out Chapati, distracting Laxus from his thoughts and tactics. After the previous battles, we have decided the arena is no longer capable of containing you all for the duration of the battle. Therefore we have decided to introduce a new system. Light shone around all the mages and Laxus immediately recognized what it was. She dash. They all vanished, everyone reappearing in a mixture of locations, all underground it seems. Laxus immediately recognized the location from the previous night. It was the mine complex, only it had changed drastically. The cave walls were now elegant and made out of a fancy type of brick with many archways and what seems to be new paths. Whatever they did to make these arenas, it was fast. They must have had only a few hours to do this kind of work. All of you have been separated, came Chapati's voice, and Laxus now understood why he was gone from his usual place. He was likely in an enclosed room with a load of monitors with the help of a crew to decide which fights to show and which to skip past. There would have not been anywhere near enough room where he had been before. We have an emergency teleportation system to evacuate those who have been defeated, so you may all fight to your heart's content. Your teams have been scattered, and now you have the choice whether to regroup or to go alone. Let the final day of the Grand Magic Games begin. Protector of the Fairies. Gray let his basic instincts take over as he broke into a run, heading down the different tunnels as he sought out an enemy to fight. He could barely hear now over the pounding sound of that voice, silencing out almost every rational thought he had. He had thought it had been bad fighting before, but it was far worse now, as if the voice had gotten a taste of control and now wanted more. It was horrifying and it was leaving him barely any time to get even a little bit of sleep, but what scared him most was how excited he was too about it all. And that was the answer he needed to understand how bad his situation was. He couldn't even distinguish between his sane thoughts anymore. But that was all right. Fighting was simply punch, kick, stab, and, most of all, don't let up until your opponent can't move anymore. Fighting was simple. He didn't need to think about such complex things like about the mind and could lose himself in the moment and the blood that followed. Who needed to think right now? The only thing that might have needed it was his ice make magic, and he had far outgrown such an old limitation. No, that was wrong. He needed ice make magic. It connected him to Ur. It was the way he fought. It was a part of him. But another thought ran through his mind, and he couldn't tell if it was his own or the voice. They even sounded the same recently anyway. That's right. Ur was holding him back. He didn't need to make anything. Why build up when he could just destroy? He didn't need to make complex structures from ice. He could instead freeze whatever he wanted and manipulate that if he needed to. It was far more innate than that stupid woman's magic. No. He slammed a fist into the wall as he came to a stop, ice spreading out from the point of contact. He needed to calm down. He was losing himself too much, and if he fell too far, then could he ever get back? It was like he was drowning in a pool of water, his body too heavy to pull himself out completely. A single misstep and he'd sink all the way to the bottom and never manage to get up again. An almost silent sound reached his ears and he almost questioned why he was able to pick up such subtle noises. Instead, however, he rushed towards it, like a wild animal that had picked up the scent of its prey. He shot round the corner and saw the mage from Mermaid Heel leaping away from him, webbing firing from her hands. He couldn't remember her name with all the rampant thoughts running through his brain, so he settled for grabbing both of the webs and freezing them solid. The ice almost reached the mage before she had the foresight to release her grip. She shot round another corner, but he wasn't willing to let her escape. She was his prey after all. As he skidding round the corner, he slammed into a wall of webbing. His eyes shot towards the mage's form, hanging from above on a large web trap she must have set up. Already she was lunging at him, likely hoping to end the battle in one move. It seemed likely considering the scared look she had on her face, and that only seemed to send a shiver up his spine in ecstasy. He let her punch connect with him as the webbing expanded from her fist and bound him further. And then ice spread out all around him and froze all the webs solid. Her saw the look of fear intensity on her face before he reached up and grabbed her before she could escape, purposely slowing down how fast his freezing took place as he let a thin layer of ice creep along her body. With each passing second he could see her pain growing as the ice's temperature slowly dropped, but it didn't give him as much satisfaction as he had wanted. A rational thought snapped through his mind before he slammed a fist against her head, hard enough to knock her unconscious. He took one look at her limp body before casting all thoughts about her away from her mind as he let his feet take him away. He vaguely heard that commenter saying something about his victory, but he didn't listen. That man's voice grated on his last nerve, and he wouldn't mind finding him down here if he had the choice and to make sure he shut up permanently. Ah well. That was another matter. For now he had people to hunt down. That woman had barely been able to satisfying him as an appetizer, and he had a big appetite today. Protector of the Fairies. Karen listened to the scores as she ran, keeping track of how many people had already been knocked out. Arana had been taken down extremely quickly, but Grey from Fairy Tale A, and unfortunately Arana had been their queen. That was 3 points they had lost there. Luckily Kagura had gone on to the offensive, catching off Rucker from Quattro Cerberus and gaining them a point of their own. Yuzu had also managed to steal a point too by defeating Raventail's female mage, Flare. Of course other teams were gaining points too. The other matches that had already been decided belonging to Lamia Scale and Fairy Tale B. Urayu Ishida had taken down the copycat guy from Raventail. Kurohibi or something. She hadn't made much effort to remember his name. What mattered, however, was that he had gotten 2 points out of it. Her brother's friend, however, Laxus, had already defeated Bacchus from Quattro Cerberus. That had gained him 3 points, and that really would be helping them right now. Right now, if she was correct, the overall positions hadn't changed much. Sabretooth hadn't gained any more points and neither had Quattro Cerberus. Her brother's team, however, had 1 point more than they did, allowing them to push her own team out of their shared 4th place. Fairy Tale A would also be climbing up closer to the top teams now, which gave them a significant advantage if they could keep it up. She had to do her part. Latching onto the person she could sense nearby, she rushed after them, using Shunpo to increase her speed to get to her target first. The closer she got, the more she recognized that magic, and she couldn't help but grin at who she was about to face. The area she came out into was larger than the hallways, almost like a miniature arena. She figured it had probably been constructed for them to fight in if they entered one of them or to use to their advantage. The layer of ice around the room was new, however, Taushiro waiting for her with his sword laid across his lap. "You took your time," he muttered as he opened his eyes, returning back from his inner world. He hadn't been afraid of being caught off guard. Hyour and Meru had been keeping watch for him, and he couldn't help but chat with his Zanpakuta spirit to pass the time. It had been so long since he had felt complete after all. "You've been busy," commented Karen as she let a flicker of flames burst from her palms, burning away the ice around her. "This room is freezing. Can't you go somewhere hotter? You leave too much of your back and arms exposed." "Now wonder you're freezing," came his reply, and Karen knew Taushiro had a point. There wasn't anything she could do about that, however. Shungkao blew away anything there, and she couldn't be bothered to wear anything over her top like yesterday if she would just end up destroying it again. And she knew she'd be using it again today. Letting flames burst off around her as Shungkao activated and she drew a mole, she reading the shifting blade up towards Toshiro just as the Shikai finished releasing itself. Toshiro matched her as he raised his own blade, the form shifting to Shikai easily. What surprised her however was how a layer of ice generated around Toshiro's fists, making ice gauntlets like her own. The dropping temperature gave her a big hint to what he was planning to. Dragon Slayer magic and your own Zanpakuto's magic. Are you trying to match me with Amol and Shunkao? I'm not trying. I will match it. Oh yeah? And why do you think you'll be able to do that? Toshiro shrugged before swiping to one side with his Zanpakuto. Sit upon the frozen heavens, Hyorin Meru. The ice spread out from the blade before forming the usual ice dragon that she had fought multiple times before. Something felt different about it now though. Like it was more alive. Was this the result of his Dragon Slayer magic? The dragon slowly raised its head, its eyes locking on her. Toshiro's blade slowly raised towards her until the point was aiming directly at her. Go! The dragon lunged, the ground around it freezing as it flew straight at her. Karen raised her own blade in kind before swiping, releasing a large crescent slash of flames. Getchuga Tenshou. The two attacks hit one another and threw up a large screen of steam, hiding both of their presences from one another. Rushing quickly around at one side, Karen darted through the steam to the other side as she swung to her left, a large burst of flames flying off her blade and covering the area she had swiped at with a volley of fire. You missed me, stated Toshiro as he darted out of the smoke, having used it to hide in before using her attack's heat to locate her. With his sword raised above him, he swung downward at her, a dragon of ice flying from the blade's point and crashing against her own blade. She could already feel the ice starting to try and freeze her, but it couldn't last with all the flames spiraling around her, especially around Amol itself. Putting on an extra burst of speed, she shot behind Toshiro, using her superior speed to try and surprise him. The chains from her gauntlets trailed in her wake and threatened to grab Toshiro as she shot past, only for him to create a small wall of ice to block their path and deflect them around him. That however left him exposed to Karen's attack from behind. His blade barely managed to come back round and deflect the edge of Amol, but he couldn't stop her fist connecting with his chest, knocking him back against his own ice wall before it shattered beneath the force. He focused on gripping the air to slow himself down before hastily deflecting another of her deadly strikes. The follow-up attack came in the form of a kick, but he dodged this one, removing a hand from his Zanpakuto as he did so. Ice Dragon's Wing Attack. He swiped up with his free arm as ice spread out and around his palm, colliding with flames that burst out around Karen. They wasn't enough to completely stop the attack however, and she found herself being the one sent flying this time, hitting the roof of the room they were in and causing some of the ceiling to collapse to the ground. Toshiro swiftly dodged the falling rubble before flying up at her. He was forced to suddenly abandon that action as he saw Karen whisper a single word quietly to herself. Massive torrents of flames burst off as her, burning the rocks and air as it spread out from her body. Toshiro knew what this was. He saw it the previous day after all. Well then, he muttered, looking down at his own Zanpakuto fondly. Shall we match her too? How about it? It's been a while after all. He slowly raised the blade until it was resting above his head, the point aimed upwards towards the ceiling. Bankai! Ice burst out from the blade, forming a cocoon around him. The temperature of the air around them both dropped as the flames flickered momentarily, the coldness of the ice threatening to freeze them solid. The cocoon slowly started to split down the middle as it revealed itself to be two wings of ice instead, joining together at Toshiro's back. That same ice continued over his shoulder before extending to his right hand, the same hand holding his Zanpakuto. The makeshift gauntlet he had created before as a form of his Dragon Slayer magic was now more like a dragon's head, clutching the hilt of the blade tightly, which now had the tsuba being an 8-pointed star. A tail extended down from his back, connected to where the wings joined together to protect his back. It flicked around him aimless and, as it flicked, nearby flames away from Karen's initial release vanished, being put out without any damage being suffered by the tail itself. Ice also covered his free hand and gave it a more claw-like look, doing the same kind of design with his feet and legs too. Despite the solid appearance they gave off, Toshiro easily was able to move them all, acting as if they weren't there in the first place to restrict his movements. What really drew most eyes watching however was the small mask of ice over his left eye, extending back like an ear as well as having a similar protrusion on the other side of his head, similar to appearance to what most believed a dragon would have. Daiguren Hyorin Meru. Umol Albader Saikwa. Toshiro nodded at her bankai as the flames cleared, not able to hide how impressed he was at it. It was one thing to see it at a distance. It was another to witness it close up. And despite the power of his own, hers was almost equally as strong. But, even without having practiced for so long with his bankai, he could more than make up for the lack of experience with the overwhelming power. He could feel the energy of his Dragon Slayer magic enhancing his bankai to incredible levels. It seemed spending that time practicing the magic more had paid off in the end. "I'll show you Daiguren Hyorin Meru's power," Toshiro muttered, leveling a steady gaze on Karen. "Let me show you the power you and your sister feared and sealed away." The wings propelled him forward, Shunpo only amplifying it further as he rushed her. Karen barely managed to back away in time to avoid his sideways slash, a wave of ice swiping along the path his sword had traced. "Hyoryuha Senpai." Twisting his grip on the blade, Toshiro stopped the blade and swiped upwards, crying out a single word. "Zeku." The ice that Karen believed she had avoided came to life as a large chunk extended towards her faster than she could believe, the front of it shaping more and more into a dragon's maw with every passing moment. In response she quickly swung her own blade downwards, flames dying down around her as they were expelled forward along her blade and into the air. Burka. The flames restricted her vision once more as they impacted with the ice, creating more and more steam to the growing gas. Refusing to make the same mistake she did last time, Karen halted for a moment as she let a large quantity of flames wrap around her. No holding back. Not against someone like this. With a quick swipe from her small blade, a large blast of flames blew them all away as she prepared to guard. Her suspicions paid off when Toshiro tried to ram her from one side, her blade easily deflecting his own. The tail behind Toshiro almost grabbed her but she dodged downwards at the last moment, her foot brushing against the ground. That was when it happened. Ice suddenly shot across the ground from 5 different directions, forming a pentagon that had her trapped within. The flames around her intensified quickly and the ice was already melting away when she saw the ice pillars being created around her, closing in. She wasn't going to make it. "Rokui Hyukatsujin," explained Toshiro as he attempted to distract her. "You missed me setting it up before. 5 markers and, once you've stepped within the boundaries, you're trapped in a large pillar of ice. I didn't expect it to hold you for long though. I set that up earlier and it is far weaker than this move." Turning his blade 90 degrees counterclockwise, the pillars drew closer towards Karen as her struggling increased. The issue was that Toshiro kept adding more and more ice. He wasn't able to move easily with all the focus he was giving to this spell of his but she knew that she wasn't making enough progress in time. "I'll finish it with this instead. Senin Hyaura." Before Karen could say a word in response, the ice pillars slammed against her, fusing together and trapping her within. Toshiro didn't turn away though, sensing something at the last moment before his attack had hit. A second later all the ice shattered as chains coated in fire spun all around Karen, coming from her legs. Each time they passed by a piece of ice it was turned right back to vapor from the waves of fire cycling across the chains. "Celsila," Karen muttered, thankful she had held something like this back instead of using it against her brother. She doubted it would have worked back then against him considering his speed, so it seemed that had been a blessing in disguise. His overwhelming strength left her with one more surprise to use after this. "You'll have to do much better than that, Toshiro." Sprinting forward, her chains propelling her like Toshiro's wings did, acting like wings for herself and also making it harder for Toshiro to reach her. He lunged forward with his blade only to pull back when she raised a leg, the chains coming dangerously close to wrapping around him and his blade. That moment of distraction was all she needed to aim her sword correctly. "Dare Saika! Ryusenksa!" Toshiro shouted out in response, stabbing his sword at the incoming flames and rapidly freezing them from the point of his sword. He couldn't freeze them all however before both attacks broke away, neither able to gain any further ground against one another as each mage put more and more magic into them. As the remaining ice shattered, Toshiro used it to distract Karen as he swung at her, releasing another wave of ice at her. She quickly created her own wave of flames to defend against them, but when it cleared she was too late to stop what Toshiro did next. Ice Dragon's Roar. A massive blast of ice shot out of Toshiro's mouth, an amount far larger than the total flames she had produced with her previous Dare Psycha spell. The wings behind Toshiro rapidly flapped as they struggled to hold him steady from the recoil the attack was threatening to give him. Karen desperately tried to pour enough flames into her blade to stop the attack, but there wasn't enough. Even with all the flames she had at her disposal, she still had a limited amount, and that was always the amount that wrapped around her naturally when she wasn't using them. That amount was technically highly concentrated flames, which was why only her strongest attacks could temporarily consume her whole limit, and now she had hit that once again. The ice broke through her flames before slamming her against a wall, freezing every part of her body except for her head. The worst part was that she couldn't even summon up enough flames to break free. She didn't have enough power. In the seats of the arena, Yoriyuki watched her student sadly as she clenched her fists. Next to her, Kisuke gave a hint of a smirk, not wanting to antagonize his old friend too much. "Seems you didn't expect Toshiro to win." "Not like this," muttered Yoriyuki. "He's a Shinigami anyway. How does he know how to use Dragon Slayer magic? Is this your doing?" "Not at all. Rather it was Mayuri's actions that resulted in the unusual combination that is Toshiro Hitsugaya. And, like Ichigo and Shinji, his powers beat in sync with one another. They resonate back and forth like a unison raid, increasing his power tremendously. To be honest, I'm impressed Karen lasted as long as she did. Her Bankai may be a strong one, but Toshiro's is far stronger since it calls up every last drop of both his Shinigami side and his Dragon Slayer side. This form is essentially what Dragon Force is to normal Dragon Slayer. Highly destructive magical power." Yoriyuki sighed reluctantly. "I see. And considering how evenly matched their powers were before, this was the tipping point to push it over the edge." "Exactly, though I must commend her for not giving up yet." "Not giving up?" Yoriyuki looked towards the screen as she spoke. "What are you, you idiot? Don't be a fool." Karen couldn't hear her mentor's warnings as she struggled to break free, drawing upon the only source of power she had left. She never used Shunkao with her Bankai because it was always so hard to control. It was easy with Shikai because the flames produced were nothing compared to the amount her Bankai could produce. But everything was amplifying when you used Bankai, and that included Shunkao too. With it her body would be completely coated in flames, but there would be so many that she wasn't sure how long she would be able to hang on for. They coated her completely, giving her a very limited amount of time in which her body would be able to handle the pressure for. Right now that limit was less than a minute, and it was going to hurt like a bitch afterwards. She'd have to use that time to win. Breaking free of the ice with a large crack as it shattered, she shot forward faster than Toshiro could recover, using the fact that he was panting for breath from his last attack to her own advantage. He swung his sword weakly and a wall of ice shot between the two, but it wasn't anywhere near its usual strength, and that meant it didn't have a hope in hell in stopping her here. The ice shattered before her blade as she swiped rapidly with it, and, as she reached Toshiro, the chains around her legs snapping towards him at the same time that she struck out again. 3 swipes of fire connected against him at once before resulting in a massive explosion of flames. Amargamek. Breathing heavily, Karen landed quickly on the ground, dismissing the flames from Shunkao and holding in the urge to fall and slam against the ground in pain. The flames from Shunkao and Bankai weren't like Umol's flames, which were completely harmless to her. These flames could burn her, and while it wasn't as bad due to her resistance to the heat, it was still painful. Already she could see a nasty one along her right shoulder, stretching down her arm. She'd had to make sure Yuzo looked at her later to help heal it up. It could have been worse, but with this she had. 1. Karen froze as hundreds of daggers of ice appeared around her, floating in the air. "Not yet, you haven't." "How?" Karen asked as she saw Toshiro appear, not even hurt. "There's no way you could have survived that so easily." "You're right," he responded as he pointed towards the dying flames. Karen turned to look just in time to see a burnt copy of Toshiro becoming almost transparent, finally revealing itself to be nothing more but a slab of ice. Zanhaiyu Ninja. This is normally only able to be used once per battle, as my opponents don't normally fall for it a second time. I'm a bit out of practice, so I was afraid it wouldn't work, but it seems your last-ditch attack distracted you enough for me to make the switch. But when Karen's eyes widened in shock. When you created that wall. No wonder it was so weak. You wanted me to shatter it and you used that chance before I did to move. Indeed. I didn't even want to be hit by any attack made by a Shunkao amplified version of you. And it seems my caution was well deserved. That attack might have been enough to beat me, if it had hit. Taoshiro paused as a wave of exhaustion came over him, swaying slightly. Damn, it's been far too long since I used my Bankai. This was a lot easier a year ago. What was this? Taoshiro gestured towards all the daggers around her. You've been assuming that my Bankai's special ability is like yours. Quantity and intensity. But that's not true. My Bankai is not strong because it can produce a large quantity of ice, nor is it because the ice is colder and denser than before either. No, the truth of the matter is that my Zanpakuto is able to use not just ice as a weapon, but water too. All the moisture around me can become my weapon. That is the true power of Daigyuren Hyorin Meru. I'm finishing this now. Gunko Tsurera. As the daggers shot forward, flames exploded all out around Karen, melting every last dagger back into water vapor. What was that? You talked way too long. No, I didn't. I already said that I was ending this now. And I am. The water vapor suddenly reformed into ice all around her, locking her limbs as it fell on her and froze her to the ground. Another set of flames burst out around her, but she knew she was already running past her limit, the strain of Shunkao catching up to her and forcing her Bankai to end, and in that moment Taoshiro struck. Ryusenksa. His blade stopped just short of her chest before erupted ice from the end of it, freezing her in a large block of it. Normally he would have let it shatter with whatever was in it, but this time he held back, allowing the ice to stay solid and gradually end. A strange array of magic circles appeared around the ice and he quickly recognized what it was. A teleportation spell. So this was how they evacuated the defeated opponents when it was clear they could no longer fight. Letting the ice slowly melt, he didn't make any moves to stop her being teleported away. Only when she was finally gone did he fall to his knees, his Bankai cracking around him. Damn, he muttered weakly, his exhaustion showing in his voice. So this is my limit right now. We won at least. Isn't that right, Hyorin Meru? Eyes closing, Taoshiro let himself fall into darkness as he slumped to the ground, not seeing the signs of the teleportation magic appeared to remove him. He didn't even notice the puppet-like figure watching him from the shadows, slowly leaving afterwards with an eternal smirk across its face. Protector of the Fairies. Silently moving down the endless corridors, Nozomi quickly realized she was lost. And that couldn't be possible considering how long she had spent memorizing the map. And besides, everything around her rang out with the sound of familiarity. Like the wall beside her. It had that strange dent in it that she had found amusing when she had first seen it. This was the 7th time she had passed that now. This was an illusion. There was no doubt about that. It was messing with her perception most likely. She was being rerouted constantly in a maze and she barely managed to notice the feel of it even now. It had a strange feeling to it as well. Like it wasn't normal magic, or rather not the normal magic she was familiar with sensing. Whoever was behind it was definitely not normal. And they had set her back by a significant amount of time too. She was running late, and if she didn't make it in time then she'd let down Ichigo and the others, and she refused to do that. The issue was that breaking out of the illusion could cause problems if done incorrectly. It would be suspicious if a large burst of magic exploded out around her. People would be sent to investigate, and she doubted the fact that she was near so many strong mages would stop them from noticing. She wasn't meant to be here after all, so the guards would be very curious about a sudden burst of magical power nearby. The subtle approach it was then. It would take a tiny bit longer, but it was worth a try. Tearing a small hole in the air beside her, she slipped into it before letting the tear close back up without a sound. Instead of the stone walls of the corridors of the arena, she found herself in her own personal dimension. Well, at least she believed it to be that. She had no idea if anyone could access this place, but no one had been able to back in Edelas, and no one had been able to in these past 7 years too. There had been the odd sign at times, but further investigation had shown it to only be because of a nearby dimension, almost overlapping with her own. She liked to imagine that it belonged to all the people who could use the normal version of her magic and not her enhanced version, courtesy of her unique powers originating from Daedalus. The dimension was bland for the most part. There was not a single piece of matter around her, yet she didn't fall. Instead, she was suspended in the air, the darkness tinted with shades of green that moved across the dimension aimlessly. Moving around was easy for her, and she let herself float across the endless space, knowing exactly where she needed to go. Anywhere would work in general, but she sometimes liked to spend time in here, acting as if moving around would actually matter. The tiers she opened all went to whether she wanted after all, even if she opened them up in the same places in this dimension. Coming to a stop, she took a calming breath before slipping her hand forward and tearing a light cut in the dimension. Her head peeked out, and, when she was satisfied with what she had seen, she let the tear widen and stepped out completely. The tear shut once more without a sound, Nozomi not needing to look to make sure it had. Instead, she focused on checking the area carefully, making sure there wasn't any more illusions in place. It seemed she had bypassed that block completely. Now that left the matter of where she was. The only way to break free from the illusion after all had been to move out of its range, and her dimension had allowed her to do just that. The problem was that she had simply messed with the coordinates of her exit portal and just ensured that she was somewhere out of the illusion. Carefully comparing the turns and pathways nearby with the map she had memorized in her head, it seemed she was either near the far east exit or only a few minutes away from her destination. She hoped it was the latter, and she also hoped no more illusionary traps were waiting for her. The feeling they had given off had felt disturbing, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Putting aside the matter for the time being, she quickly headed down towards her destination. The detour had probably only added 5 minutes to her overall time, as her dimension slowed everything down to an impossible degree. She could slip in and out, and sometimes not even a second would have passed between one tier cutting and the other opening. Actually entering and exiting actually took longer because she could only move so fast. The fact time flowed so strangely made it a nice retreat if she wanted a break or just wanted to be alone without anyone noticing. It was her secret place, somewhere no one ever saw unless they were invited in, and that had never happened before yet. As she took a step around the final turn, a feeling of dread filled her body. She didn't move for a second, but when she did, she moved quickly, making it to the doorway she needed to enter through and sensing carefully into the room. She could only sense one person, and that was extremely faint, not like the feeling of a magical power being suppressed, but rather of someone on the verge of death or loss of consciousness. Deciding it was safe but still wanting to be carefully, she pushed the door open with one hand, her other ready to act if an enemy really was there. There wasn't. The room was perfectly bare of enemies. There was a lot of blood, however. Half the room was coated in it, and, oh God! She felt her expressionless facade break as she brought a hand to her mouth, the only thing stopping her from throwing up. Her back hit the wall behind her as she moved away from the sight, her legs feeling weak. There weren't really many bodies to see, but that was because they had been burst completely, organs splattered everywhere in the room. It was almost like the one who did this had forced the body to explode from the inside, and the result had been this. Steadying herself and trying to put the sight out of her mind as best as she could, she focused on the one man still alive in the entire room, his legs blown off and placed almost mockingly close to him. His eyes looked so dead, and he barely acknowledged her presence, the only sign he had noticed being the slight movement they had made when she looked at him. There was only one thing she could do for him. He was as good as dead with the amount of blood pooling around him, and she wasn't a healer. She wasn't sure many healers would be able to save this man's life. This kind of damage needed regeneration to fix it. So she instead leaned down to him and gave him a soft smile, as if that would help reassure him before she did the only thing she could do to help. And then, as gently as she could, she snapped his neck, killing him instantly. She let his head drop back down to the ground before turning away. She had a job to do, despite the horrors that had happened here. A row of monitors and controllers were present in front of her, and she knew what they were all for. These were the controls for the teleportation system being used to evacuate the defeated mages. Immediately she hurried to check if any damage had been done to the systems, but it seemed there hadn't been. All systems seemed to be running smoothly, though there seemed to be some error logs. She had time to glance through them, but first she had to make sure Ichigo knew she was in place. Switching between the many cameras positioned on each person, she quickly found Ichigo, the man not seeming to be in any hurry as he walked along the corridors. She knew what he was doing though. He was avoiding any paths that he knew people were down and was heading towards the surface, or at least as high as he could go if he didn't know the way. It also meant he would avoid pointless fights and would be able to leave it to the others. Now all that he needed was the signal. Withdrawing a small lacrima from her cloak, she activated it and let it send a small signal of pulses. There was barely any visible sign from Ichigo, but she noticed how his hand clenched slightly before each finger was extended slowly. It was the signal that he had received the message. With that she could cancel her own before anyone picked up on it. Now all she could do was wait. She quickly set up a row of all the mages and settled down in the only chair not damaged in the room. She had a job to do after all and didn't want to mess it up when her role was needed. There was far too much riding on this, especially with this unknown factor. She couldn't afford to get lax just yet. Protector of the Fairies. Where's Hibiki? Asked Ichigo as he glanced at his disciples. Well, one to be precise. Ren was Sherry to watch the games and Hibiki was who knew where. Only Eve was here to watch with him. Eve only shrugged, his eyes leaving the screen for a moment as he considered his teacher's words. I'm not sure. I remember he was in a bit of a rush a few days ago. 2 days ago, I think. Really? He was enjoying watching the games before then, if I remember correctly. I figured perhaps he would be skipping them yesterday, but I never saw him last night either, and I haven't seen him today either. I thought he would at least want to support the others. Eve frowned. I remember him leaving the hotel quickly back then. I thought I saw him greeting Ichigo at some point before then too, and that was definitely before he started acting a bit irrational. Do you think he went back to the guild? Ichigo considered the possibility carefully. It would be tough, but it was definitely doable to get back quickly enough. If he left on the evening of the third day and made it to one of the other major cities nearby, he could likely catch a train the following morning and be back at the guild by nightfall at the latest. Still, why would he go back so suddenly? Did he forget something? It was a lot of work to deal with if he had. Excuse me a minute, Ichigo muttered, Eve looking at him strangely as he left, but he didn't push him for any answers. Sneaking away from the crowds, he quickly snuck over towards the master, asking to borrow the communicator they had with the guild back home in case of emergencies with some of their projects. Heading towards a secluded area where no one would be able to overhear him, he quickly switched the device on and saw the face of a familiar mage. Ichigo? Where's the master? He's just watching the games, Riko, Ichigo responded quickly. Is Hibiki there? Riko frowned. Hibiki? Yeah, he came in this morning. Went down to the lower levels of the research facility. I was surprised to see him, to be honest, and he didn't say much, only seeming to be in a hurry. Riko cut off as a large alarm rang through the lacrima, muffled slightly on Ichigo's end to his relief. What was that? Riko didn't answer for a moment, going out of view to where he assumed the archive monitors were nearby. When she appeared, there was an almost scared look on her face. The docking bay doors are opening. I can't shut them down, and the security measures aren't responding. The archive magic's not responding. It's Hibiki, Ichigo muttered, not wanting to believe it. He knew the truth though. Those security measures had been designed by Hibiki and no one could make them freeze as they probably were like he could. Is he taking Christina? Riko slowly shook her head. The bay doors opening aren't ones I recognize. And? Ichigo, what is that? You see it, don't you? Muttered Ichigo, noticing the widening of Riko's eyes. Damn it, Hibiki, what are you playing at? What should we do? Nothing. We can't stop him if he's managed to power up that thing. I'll alert the master. I just hope whatever Hibiki does won't be something he'll come to regret. The master won't forgive him for revealing this. Not with everything that's at stake with the Magic Council. But sir. What is this thing? If it's not Christina Dash. It's the culmination of 7 years of work. And trust me, that's all you want to know. Hopefully Hibiki won't tear that all down with whatever he's planning. Otherwise we might end up in the same situation Fairy Tail's in. We aren't meant to have developed this thing after all. Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.